So good morning to everyone who is joining us. I'm delighted to be joined throughout today by colleagues from LSBU and externally and beyond. So my name is Neil Hudson-Basing. I am the Corporate Events Manager at London South Bank University. Welcome to today. I'm just going to take you through some virtual housekeeping, starting with a short statement around respect and dignity. Everyone speaking at or attending an LSBU event, whether in person or virtually, should be treated with respect, dignity, and courtesy. LSBU operates an environment built on equality, inclusion, and acceptance. We value contributions, feedback, and comments, and wish to create a space for sharing, learning, celebrating, and bringing communities together. LSBU does not tolerate any form of bullying, abuse, harassment, or discrimination. Inappropriate behaviour, including that potentially impacts or contradicts LSBU's reputation and values, will be treated seriously and acted upon. Anyone exhibiting any example of this behaviour will also be removed from the webinar. We want our events to be an enjoyable, safe and warm experience for all. Thank you for adhering to these guidelines. So I'm just going to take you through the Zoom functionality before I hand over to Damien, Nick and Nikki. Great to see people making use of the chat box. Please continue to do so. In the absence of being able to see you face to face, it's great to know who our audience are. It helps us to break down the virtual wall that we're all experiencing and allow a space for sharing. You'll also see that there's the Q&A box. I ask you to distinguish between the Q&A box and the chat box. Please pop your questions in the Q&A box so they do not get lost in the chat box. You can upvote on the questions you most want to hear answered by clicking the thumbs up symbol, and that boosts them to the top of the list. You'll see that I've also enabled closed captioning, which is the subtitles you see on your screen. If you do not wish to see these, you can hide them clicking on the arrow next to the closed captioning symbol, and you can hide those. Someone has just pointed out that they are a little bit sketchy. Sometimes it's done by AI, so some of the interpretations of what people are saying can be a little bit off, but please bear with us. Please share your thoughts and comments on Twitter, and we'll share our Twitter handle in there. And then finally, I'd just like to just ask you to bear in mind that some of the topics covered today may be sensitive, they may be triggering. If you need to take a break at any point during the day, there are comfort breaks scheduled, but at any point that you need to take a break, we encourage you to do so. All of us on screen, this is a safe space and we want you to feel relaxed and comfortable with taking part in today, and we want you to enjoy it as well. So do take breaks as and when you need to. If you need any support or signposting, please pop the panelists a message in the chat box and we will be happy to support you with that. I'd now like to hand over to Damien. Over to you, Damien.
Thanks, Neil, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see lots of familiar people from PARC events and new people as well from around the world in the chat. And good to introduce you all to today's event. Just a little bit about the Participatory Autism Research Collective. PARC was set up back in 2015, and our first meeting consisted of 5 people in a room at London South Bank University. So we started with quite humble beginnings, but we were influenced by previous projects that were autistic led that were happening at the time, like the Autonomy Journal led by Barry Arnold, and what was called the Theorizing Autism Project that a number of us were involved in at the time. And in this first meeting, we set out as objectives to address the isolation felt by autistic researchers as one of our objectives. And that's quite interesting, thinking we started with 5 people in a room, and today we've got 500 odd people signed up to the event through the day. So hopefully we're starting to achieve something there. To share research by autistic people and to promote participatory research in the field generally, and to critically comment on autism research and to bring together collective efforts to criticise some of the more dehumanising research that exists in the field. So in the last few years, PARC has certainly grown, and we've been holding an annual conference on critical autism studies. And this started with one which was held by South Bank University in 2017, which was partnered by a Critical Autism Studies group, I think led by Lindsay Odell and colleagues. And PARC picked up this conference and held it kind of our own way ever since. And unfortunately, last year we were unable to hold such an event because of the COVID crisis. But this year we've gone online. We were also involved recently in the Interdisciplinary Autism Research Festival, which was a 3-day event. And if you missed that, many of the presentations from that were recorded and will be released through the year. And with this event, we had such a high number of submissions that, as well as holding this event today, we're also planning a series of events in the autumn. On the 18th and 19th of October, and on the 6th and 7th of December. So watch out for future events happening between South Bank Uni and PARC. There's also the PARC Autism Journal Club, which is linked with the University of Kent. We have a presentation next Monday, but unfortunately the tickets are already sold out for that. However, that will be recorded as well and made available afterwards. And that's, but that presentation will be from Amy Pearson and Kieran Rose about their article around masking, which is very interesting. We've also got one which is yet to be announced coming up in July, looking at the 19th of July, with Caroline Hurst and Laura Crane talking about the work they did around peer support. We're also looking at an event on the 20th of July around critical approaches to pathological demand avoidance, which Richard Woods and colleagues are looking into. So look out for announcements for future events. I should also say the yearly Autistic conference is happening soon. So for those interested in attending online Autistic this year, that's at the end of July, and no doubt will be open for people to sign up for it soon as well. In today's event, we've got quite a mixture of presentations, a mixture of experienced presenters, but also brand new presenters to PARC. And so please be respectful and give people time to present their ideas. And we'll do our best to stick to time. The event today is highlighting the work of various autistic-led and collective projects, and also topics such as peer support. We've also got a session later today around media representations, which I'm particularly looking forward to because I'm involved in one of the projects myself. So in the discussion that's going to follow from that. So very much looking forward to today. And on that note, I'll pass over to Nikki.
Brilliant. Thanks, Damien. I'm looking at the time. It says 9:12 on one of my computers and 9:14 on the other one. So I'm just going to speak for a minute because I'm not sure which is the right time. We absolutely think PARC is the best thing at London South Bank University, because we run an MA in autism in education, and PARC really enriches our MA, because our view is that if you want to learn about autism, you learn about autism from autistic people. We also have a range of research projects, funded projects, and one of the principles of the Critical Autism and Disability Studies research group is that autism research is done by properly paid and properly supported autistic researchers. And it's a fundamental belief that we need to make this happen. And the thing about just bringing in people and employing them, that's only half the story, because people need proper, decent working conditions. And this is something that we're trying to model at South Bank University as practice as well as principle. So I'm very delighted that Nick Chown is joining us for our latest project, which is about access to NHS health checks for autistic people. So if anybody has got any wisdom on that subject, you can pop that in the chat, because that's of great interest to us. We've also got another project going about older autistic adults over 45 and their family carers and the sort of support that they need in the community. And we're still going on with our mentoring project that Damien and I were involved with a long time ago. I'm going to stop there because the timing today is so tight, because we've got such brilliant contributions. But just to say welcome, and you are amongst friends, and thank you for participating. So back to Neil.
Thank you, Nikki. So for our first session, we have a poetry reading by Hazard. Just to let you know, those of you that are tuning in live get to enjoy this. Unfortunately, this session is not going to be recorded, so I am going to pause recording, enjoy it, and Hazard, I'd like to hand over to you. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who I had the good fortune of being an external examiner for quite recently. I might be able to say something more about this. Cairi McKenzie, and they're going to be talking about Quality Matters, Says Who, an exploration of the lived experience of autistic people with a focus on what in their life is good, what contributes to this, and whether this differs from regulating standards. So over to you.
Okay, I'll share my screen, Damien. That's okay. Hopefully everybody can. Hazard, I can see you, Neil. Brilliant, thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much first and foremost. I don't know how I quite followed that, Hazard. Yeah, that was really, really awesome. So my name is Cairi McKenzie. I just wanted to say thank you so much for being given the opportunity to talk to you about my research. Please bear with me, as Damien made reference to there. I only completed this very recently. I'm very kind of new at presenting work, especially work that's my own. So I will try and not bumble or jumble, and I will definitely stick to time, Neil. So I'm going to hit my little start watch here, just so I got it there. So my title is Quality Matters Says Who. So I really wanted to engage with autistic people during my Masters by Research in terms of exploring through their lived experiences, in terms of how they viewed a service to be good. And the starting point really came about from the repeated events of scandal influencing social care. So it just felt that as soon as something would go wrong, there would be an immediate kind of reactive based response. And we saw that from Winterbourne View. So Winterbourne View back in 2011, we're now 10 years on. And I suppose one of my questions is how much has changed despite the response from that very public scandal that I'm sure we all saw. We've also had Walton View most recently in 2019, and I don't unfortunately think that, I think there will be many more as well. So my key question was Winterbourne. So post Winterbourne View, there was various publications, positive practice of care, reduction of the use of restrictive practices, and the regulator of social care Health and Social Care, CQC, actually revised their standards. And to drive the standards home, they published a strategy in 2016, which was going to cover them until this year. And a key line within the strategy raised this notion of a single shared view of quality. So they really wanted, they focused on intelligence-driven, ensuring that services didn't need to provide multiple approaches or data sources. And it seemed, I really wondered how on earth can a regulator who is social care, human service based, how can a single shared view of quality be achieved? So there were my key questions. So really wanted to, as I say, listen to, you know, disclosure, I'm not autistic. I cannot relate from that insider perspective, but I very much wanted to collaborate with those who were autistic, as I say, in terms of finding what they viewed as important and good to them now. Before I get into the method, obviously we've got 20-25 minutes. So there's a whole context chapter that took place, which I looked at in terms of when did quality start to take shape within health and social care? And so from about the Care Act 2000, that's really when we started to see result-orientated monitoring, which really kind of put forward the product of a service rather than the process and the quality of those processes for people within services or accessing services. I also explored theory, so from medical model, social model, biopsychosocial model, disability capability theory, ableist theory, etc., and really settled on the fact that, you know, still service provision and the standards that direct health and social care services are still entrenched and drenched in a deficit-focused medical model. That's a very kind of summarized version of quite a lot of words, as Damien, I'm sure, will testify to. So my method. So I used a method, participant-driven photo elicitation with photographs produced independently by the participants, and then we engaged in semi-structured interview with the photographs directing the flow of the interviews. Very quickly, positionality, I've made reference to the fact that, you know, I'm not autistic. Also at the time I was within the charity that the participants were supported by. I occupied a role as head of autism practice, and I had to be very mindful of the power dynamics and the potential of people being involved because of who I was, not necessarily because they wanted to be. So also there was quite a lot of ethical considerations that took place, like any research. And I used, as I say, novice researcher, I used Braun and Clark's tool format to help me really immerse myself in the data, to then create overarching themes and then set on my actual themes that I was going to discuss, and I will discuss some of them with you. So a limitation really is, it's a very, very small, you know, it's really small. Obviously I wrapped up last year, COVID happened, various things happened during actual research. So it's very, very small group, 4 people. The numbers reflect the number of images people took. So I gave basic direction in terms of saying around 10 to 15. And so the numbers on the screen reflect how many people took. So findings and discussion. So here are my overarching headings. So negative early experiences was category 1, and what is important and good now. I'm really, really sorry, guys. I've waited all day for this, and my dog is now literally scratching at the door. So just 2 seconds, 1 minute, I will make time of it.
We completely understand, Cairi. It's the nature of live events.
Didn't plan for that, Neil. I'm so sorry.
Not at all.
So negative early experiences. So really, I kind of, in practice of me structured interviewing, I use questions to that would instigate a biographical kind of discussion, and these were some of the concepts that came up. So not the right space, instability of space, lack of control and restriction around preferred activities, and the relationships that people experienced, which then kind of many of the participants talked about in terms of negative self-views. The second category, I'm not going to be, obviously because of time, I'm not going to be able to go into all of these, but I have made an effort to pull out several, is the importance of having own space, and not just space, but having this space and the autonomy and the creativity and the belief and the support to create one's own home was a real strong theme. Access to passions and preferred items, and those to not be used as rewards or sanctions or bargaining tools, just free access to embrace and enjoy one's interests was really integral. Financial control, difference in relationships, and also kind of the shift from people actually recognizing self-worth and self-belief. So let's get into it then. So negative early experiences. So I'll be honest, I was very, very naive. And I think this came from my my fortunate position in that I've never had to tolerate or be exposed to services whereby I would be so vulnerable or controlled or viewed in such a derogatory way as many of the participants had experienced. And it was very, very emotive. So not the right space. So Hannah talks about remembering, you know, the really difficult times, just constantly kind of crying. She referred to always remembering the kickoffs. Jean referred to it as awful, you know, just people didn't understand me, people had no time for me. Hayla talked about not having access to the right space, the space being wrong, and Virgil also made reference to life being very, very hard and feeling completely dead on his feet. And we're going to return to there's a message that travels through Virgil's information. Instability of space was really centralized. It was raised by 3 of the 4 participants, but Hannah's, I think I pulled it out because it was really quite it really does reflect the amount and the number of places that Hannah accessed. And I remember at the time reflecting and that Hannah was like, oh, where did I go to next? Where did I go to next? And so made reference to several hospital admissions. Following admissions was then moved to various care agencies, various care foster placements, hostel at one point, and then within a shared house. So, I mean, Hannah, I think by the age of about 18, I think he'd been in maybe 7 or 8 different services. Lack of control. So obviously within these spaces that were governed and directed and often staff-led, were, you know, very chaotic. And Hannah talked about how, you know, in terms of you didn't know who was going to be accessing space. A lot of Hannah spaces were crisis based. So and she would be basically told about eating and when she was going to eat and what to do, when to do it, and was very kind of staff led. I think this one was really interesting from I think this was Virgil. In terms of living in the moment and finding it really difficult in terms of being stuck in the moment and not really knowing what was coming next because of lack of autonomy and control over his own moments and his moments as an individual. Challenging relationships, really many of the points that Hazard made reference to, but there was real kind of assumed incompetence that all participants spoke about when surrounded by individuals whose understanding of autism and them as autistic people being deficit focused. So Hannah talks about how the staff next door would have handovers and would share information about her in a very derogatory way. And she could hear them, and you know, and that you know, talk about how bad she'd been and how, you know, stupid she was. Halo talked about his voice not being heard and it being almost dismissed, like he couldn't speak for himself, and he couldn't, you know, what would he have to say that was of any insight? And as I say, this was closely aligned with assumed incompetence. So I remember Halo talking about a time when he was supported, and he refers to the member staff in his own words, which you can see on the screen now. But he remembers getting to the across the road, and the member staff saying, "Shall we all hold hands then?" In his face during the interview, he was like, I kind of asked her to say it again, like repeat, because I couldn't like fathom the fact that she would think that I needed my hand holding to cross the road. And so his response was, well, no, we're not babies and I can cross on my own, thank you very much. But again, just a reflection of that dominant medical narrative and how people view individuals, if understanding is over medicalized or from a dominant medical model. So again, Hazard referred to the impact of deficit being focused on what people cannot do, what they find difficulty in doing, being broken, being not fully human, being dehumanized, and all of the individuals and participants really internalized that. So Hannah said, I hated myself for so long. She talked about feeling very shameful. Jean would talk about how very regularly would be excluded from engaging in activities of meaning. And people say, well, you can't do that because you're the naughty one. And obviously there was interactions with other agencies such as the police there that you can see Virgil relating to. So what's important in good now? So as I say, I've pulled out a couple of them. So having an own space and creating a home space was part of this presentation. I've merged together, which I hope is okay. So I found it really fascinating to Halo, and Jean both took photographs of the front door. And bearing in mind, obviously, there was no discussion between the participants. The interviews were one-on-one. The photographs were their own photographs. Really interesting that both of these participants took a photograph of the front door and reflected the safety of it, and the space being the physical boundary of this is my space. This is my own home. I can decide almost who comes and goes. Was really, really interesting. Now, it wasn't just the notion of having one's own space and one's own kind of bricks and mortar, if you like, but what was then extended further, and this was a key point raised by the National Autism Task Force, the Equality Guide, was the autonomy around creating space. And so 3 of the participants took photographs of what their space looked like now. So a really interesting point here raised by Virgil is that he talks about how in partnership he worked with the staff to identify how the space would be used to meet his needs. And he talked about that when it was a blank space, that he used black tape. So he had all the measurements of all his appliances and furniture, and he basically used black tape to map it out, and he would spend time walking and navigating. And if it didn't feel right, the black tape would come up and he would reposition it. And he said that he'd never had that experience before. He had been put places, whereas he was really kind of part of building the space up. This is a photograph from Hannah. So Hannah, again, full ownership of building her space up, and having the plan kind of kept her involved and kept her going. There's a couple of things I want to pull out here from this photograph, which are really quite poignant. One of Hannah's photographs were, I don't know if you can see, but there's a load of photographs on the wall to the side of the TV. They're all the family and friends and individuals who are unpaid. And connections that she has built up over time. Sorry, guys. And the candle as well. So the candle's one of those cinnamon candles, and that was to create the sense of home and remind Hannah of time spent with family. So oh, don't you just love homeworking? Don't you just love homeworking? So This was another picture from Halo. So Halo talks about, so again, really want to pull out here, so infantilization. So historically, Halo had not been allowed access to items. And key items were Southport figures, Southport videos, Hulk videos. They had been deemed to be inappropriate. And so within the space that Halo was now living in, he has, you know, obviously access to items that he brings joy. And so he really kind of likes quite creative wall art. And so when they were redecorating, he talks about how we took photographs to make sure that we could put them back to exactly where they needed to be. And another picture from Halo was, again, just access to items. And he talks about bringing an atmosphere, and he talked very much about being in tune with the physical space and how he felt inside. So importance of access, Halo in predominantly he's dedicated 7 of his 9 photographs to items of importance. Things that had previously been controlled and he had not been given access to, or not allowed access to. So his TV, so they always wanted a TV. The Bat Cave, so that literally was a barrier outside of his front door. The one I did want to speak a little bit about here was, I was really interested, I don't know if you can see the Iron Brew and the Pepsi bottles. And when Halo sent me these photographs, I was like, why is he took photographs of pop? And again, he'd not been allowed to access such items. It had been decided by other people that it wasn't good for him, and therefore he was not allowed access to these. And also his money had been physically controlled, and therefore he had no way of obtaining products outside of the permissions of those around him. So Jean, previous to moving, historically all connections and communications with her family had been controlled by services and by staff. Jean was supported about 54 years of age to one, access a mobile phone, and to you know, actually learn to use it independently of other people, and so is now in continuous and regular contact with her sister. In terms of preferred items, a really interesting point here. So Virgil took photographs of, I'm not sure about the choice of music, and I said this to Virgil, but Virgil loves Westlife, and he would spend a lot of time, he said, just listening to music over and over again. And he would talk about how he would become absorbed in the music and in the flow of the music. And it really struck me in terms of when I started to think about Martin Seligman's model of Parma and that flow state. And when he was talking about the joy and the contentment that listening to music gave him, it was really clear that, you know, he'd found ways, and he'd been supported to find ways to meet his own, or his own well-being. So how have relationships changed? So relationships changed in terms of when people talked about being surrounded by individuals who focused on what individuals could do and not on what they could not do. And so these were a couple of photographs taken by Jean, and Jean referenced saying, you know, I really know that we've got rapport, and I know that you genuinely enjoy spending time with me because, well, you don't get paid to. And bearing in mind that a lot of relationships previously had been relationships whereby there was always a power imbalance, because ultimately people were being paid to be within individuals' lives a lot of the time for these participants. Again, you know, within services that focused on the participants' autistic strengths, Hannah had basically said, I always wanted my own pet, you know, but Hannah had been raised by, had a really close relationship with our grandparents who had dogs, and had always been told, you can't, there's no way you can have a pet, you know, you're autistic, you know, you can't really look after yourself, there's absolutely no way within the setting that you can have your own pet. And so Hannah now does have her own pet. She has her own cat, which she calls Pine, and really kind of developed real, again, contentment and flow within those relationships. I'm going to crack on a little bit. So again, being surrounded by things of real interest. So immersed in Liverpool and community and identity and being part of the local space was really, really important to Virgil, and being enabled and being given the space to do those things was really integral. And a big shift was going back to Virgil, who's talked about being dead on his feet. He says, now that I work with people and people, you know, recognize that I maybe learn differently, and I've developed my own ways of learning, but I now feel physically stronger and mentally stronger. And Hannah talks about how for the first time she was made to feel like a person and not viewed as invisible. Now that was really important, in the individuals talked about as soon as they were surrounded by others who viewed, who understood their autism or viewed their autism as a strength through a strength-based model. So focused on what people could do and as opposed to what they could not do. Hannah talked about how she felt less shame. And there was a real point where she said the shame doesn't come now, which I thought was really kind of provoking and emotional. Jean, who in the past had said, oh yeah, I was really bad, I was really naughty, I was really difficult, is also now in a position to say, actually, I'm a pretty cool person and I'm pretty amazing. So reflections and conclusions is don't do a presentation at the bottom of your garden. Find a proper space. So in terms of the research, though, obviously it's not completely participatory. As I said, there was a couple of things I would have done, and that I would have, if I did it again, I'd want to complete follow-up interviews, and I would actually want to involve people in the analysis. I didn't make clear I intentionally didn't involve the participants in the analysis just because of my own lack of experience in completing research, that I just didn't think it would be fair to do that at that time. So, but going forward, I would absolutely want to aim to involve people in the analysis of the data. And as I said throughout, I'm not autistic. So back to my questions then. How can a single shared view of quality pursued by CQC under their 2016-2021 strategy be responsibly and ethically applied to services that support autistic people? Quite simply, it's not possible. Whilst that shared vision is founded on dominant narratives of disability, which are steeped in dysfunctionality, it's not possible. Humans have treated other humans appallingly, yes, due to a range of factors, but arguably one of the main one being the current ontology of autism. Deficit-based model of autism significantly increases the risk of autistic people being seen as less human, setting the scene for inhumane support, and at best, reduced quality of life. So there's a need for a complete ontological shift in how autism and autistic people are understood. And this would potentially enable CQC regulation to be informed by a neurodiversity and critical autism study approach. Metrics used by CQC need to be directly informed by guidance that has been autistic-led. For example, National Autism Task Force, an independent quality guide, and core capabilities. These need to be central, not complementary. And also, it's really, really important that the process is measured as much as the outcome. So to conclude, our current understanding is impeding the quality of services and their support, and therefore I do believe that there will continue to be more and more and more scandal. And as Damien himself once said, what one considers autism to be will have a significant impact on how one then interprets what is meant by best practice with autistic people. Thank you so much for your time, and I do apologise for the disruptions. So you may not want to use that video, Neil.
It's absolutely fine. It's the nature of virtual events. We've seen dogs, children, cats, postmen, delivery. You know, to do not.
I'm not really sure how much clearer that gesture could have been, though. Like, don't come in.
You're absolutely fine. You're absolutely fine. So Hazard, you are welcome to join us back on screen if you'd like to. If not, you can keep your camera off for the Q&A. And we have some questions to get through. And our first question is for Cairi. Is this work published? I'd like to read in more detail if possible.
It's not published yet. No, it's not. I am aiming to publish imminently, but it is not currently published now.
Okay, cool. And I mean, we will be sharing the recording of this video post event, so you can kind of like listen over to it again. If people want to get in touch with you, if they can email
Absolutely.
me, if you can email me at the email address that you received the confirmation email to, I will forward that on to Cairi for you. So our next question is for Hazard. Your poem was amazing and encapsulated so much autistic experience from such a specific standpoint, as well as being brilliantly written and evocative. Do you have plans to record or publish it?
A very kind comment. Thank you very much. No, I've only really done this for myself before. This is the first poem that I've ever performed, but that's very encouraging. So maybe in the future.
Fantastic.
But I think it's more like, yeah, like spoken word. To do it, I'd love to do it in person, you know, with an audience, that kind of thing, just to feel the vibe.
Well, I think that's firstly brilliantly done for your first time, but also would be very happy to support that at LSBU. So yeah. Damien, would you like to come in at all?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I really like the way you used visual references throughout the poetry, so I could have the words and visuals at times, and then kind of links to Cairi's talk as well, the use of photography and the methodology and the power of this visual representations matching up. And it's something to think about. And if you want to comment on that, so either of you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it was just really insightful. I'd not been introduced to photo elicitation previously, and also it was directed by my superior and supervisor, Dr. Alison Moore. So for me, it was just really insightful in that it is a cliche, but 1,000 words. You know, a picture is as good as 1,000 words, and it was just really interesting, as I say, the autonomy and also the device, you know, the use of technology as well. So the devices were selected by individuals and chosen, and I think it just gave people space and time, and also was a good point of reference to go back to, which really structured the dialogues that we had. So I thought it was fantastic using photographs.
Fantastic. Cool. We've got a question from Rachel for Cairi. I worry sometimes that those of us who are reliant on welfare benefits like PIP, that we have to hold two narratives at once. We need care services to recognise our strengths, but in an austerity society, we have to parade our brokenness to get ongoing support from mental health services or the DWP. Do you think it's possible to have both of these narratives?
No, and I don't think there should be a need to have both. I mean, this is my whole thing around this ontological shift, is that in being involved in direct care, exactly, individuals have to portray risk. Money is funded by risk, and it's funded based on people's deficits and difficulties because of how we currently understand disability. And there needs to be a shift in terms of an ontological shift in terms of how we understand autism, and recognition that support can be tied to other things other than one portraying a broken self. That's my personal opinion, but I just think it's not helpful that support is driven by how difficult or how the circumstances, the dangerous circumstances that many autistic people are experienced to survive in, not live in, but survive in. So currently those two narratives are needed, but I don't think that they should be. I don't know if I answered that very well. I'm very new to this, guys. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Damien or Hazard, would either of you like to come in on that?
I was a bit lost there reading following questions.
I know.
they're coming through fast, so so no worries. We could move on to the next one, which is from Anne for Cairi as well. At what stage in their lives were your 4 participants recognised as autistic, particularly the women participants?
So Jean was not diagnosed until was 39 and a half. And Hannah was diagnosed, I think, about 16, 17. But Hannah's obviously a lot younger than Jean. But yeah, Jean was misdiagnosed as schizophrenia and spent a lot of time in hospital. And also wasn't able to include some of the harsh realities that Jean experienced during that time. But yeah, we're late diagnosed.
Thank you. Stephen makes a comment, effective, not cognitive empathy is often an autistic strength. You'd have to be boneheaded not to detect a human quality like that. Damien?
Just the point where, for me, cognitive empathy is two-way. So the double empathy problem, as it were, is around cognitive empathy. So if you don't have similar experiences in quality of life and culture to someone else, then it's difficult to understand and empathize without putting a lot of effort in. And often what's put out as empathy or cognitive empathy is just assumption and projection a lot of the time, and often gets it wrong. So I would say the cognitive empathy difficulties are in both directions.
Thank you.
It's a comment on the cognitive empathy thing. But effective empathy, no, there's no lack of that at all, I don't think.
Thank you. We have an anonymous question. If interest needs were denied as not appropriate, were there any attempts to define or justify appropriateness?
No. So basically, it was a regime based. So I think it's like linking to no, the conditions within 3 of the participants lived in were clinical. They were extremely clinical. And often that narrative around, so if you read National Autism Task Force Guide, it talks about passion and embracing passion, and actually items being a real key tool for regulation, self-regulation and empowerment and increased self-esteem and well-being. Whereas within these medical settings, they were viewed as obsessions and fixations and things that needed to be controlled and regulated. And that was also then paralleled as well with being used as punishers and or potential rewards in some occasions. So yeah, so there was no alternative. The alternative often was PRN, seclusion, physical restraint, or blanket restrictions. So you've not done this today, so you won't be seeing family this afternoon. Or you did that on Monday, so you won't be doing such and such on Friday afternoon.
Thank you. And final question, because we are tight for time, from Gemma. Would love to hear more from both of you. How can we keep up with your future publications, readings and work? Hazard, we'll come to you first.
I don't really have an answer.
That's okay. That's okay. We will touch base after. We will touch base afterwards and talk about potential live if you know when time is right.
We'll try and support and help you whichever way is.
That's really cool. Thank you.
Thank you. And Cairi?
Yeah, so I am actively going to start looking at condensing the 30 words into a published journal, and then yeah, so as soon as I do that, I'll get in touch with Damien, hopefully get some Twitter out there. So yeah, keep an eye on hopefully Damien's tweet page or Twitter page.
Thank you both so much. There are some questions remaining in the Q&A box. If you'd like to type an answer to those, if you're sticking around and have time, you're very welcome to do so. But thank you both so much. Thank you.
And hello to everyone. Krysia's here. We also have Susie on the panel, I believe, who's going to be available for Q&A with us too afterwards. So I'm just going to share my screen to begin the presentation. I think that's all okay now. There we go. So this is this was my master's in sociology research project at the University of Kent. It was a collaborative project, so you can see it was created by a group of students at the University of Kent, neurodivergent students, focusing on their well-being. And they are named here, those that wanted to be named. There are others that aren't named as well for their own reasons. And Krysia and I will be co-presenting a snapshot of the research today about modelling effective inclusivity by responsiveness as responsibility. So just to give a little bit of background about how I got to doing this project. Sorry, first of all, I'm going to let Krysia introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Donna. So I was involved in the first two phases of Donna's MA project. Some background on me: I'm a PhD student at the University of Kent. I've been at Kent on and off for about 10 years now, studying various things from languages, autism studies, and I'm now looking at social inclusion and belonging of autistic people from a sociological perspective. And I think for me, why I chose to take part in this project, because I can be quite picky with which projects I take part in, was the collaborative nature of it, and actually how important it is for us as neurodivergent students to have our voices heard. So it's not often we get a chance to collaborate with, rather it's input in, and I thought that was really important. And I agree with Damien, it is good to be picky.
Thanks, Krysia. Yeah, so I have a background in working in various helping roles through my career, and I've always been really honoured to work with neurodivergent individuals of various kinds, and I currently work as a mentor, a specialist mentor as well. And through my work, I became aware of various aspects of our attitudes to disability, and I tend to think of disability as different rather than disability. And so that kind of was the foundation of creating a research project that was theoretically then informed by interests in things like post-colonial studies, Spivak, subalternism, and Frere's dialogic processes as well. So my intentions were to create a collaborative project that was collaborative throughout the design, analysis, and conclusions. And it was relational in that it was very much focused on listening well to the voices of people that may feel that they don't have their voices heard very much, in order to gain understanding and create a sense of solidarity. And it was emergent in that I didn't have any hypothesis or expectation, and an appreciative inquiry, in the sense that it's just looking at a situation, so it's not focusing on negatives or positive, it's trying to look at the whole situation, what's being experienced, and very much participant-led. So these were the research questions. How can effective inclusivity be modelled in this research? What themes emerge as relevant to participants regarding their well-being, and what implications does this have for service provision. There were 3 rounds of collaboration in the original research. We're now actually kind of independently continuing with what I'll call a 4th round towards co-authorship, and that has generated this presentation as well. So you can see here a breakdown of the kind of demographics of participants. People that wanted to participate just identified as neurodivergent, and it was quite an open category. So originally it was open to anyone with a mental health condition or autism. It did actually end up being all the participants that stayed was more focused on autism. Yeah, and Krysia took part in the first 2 rounds, and Susie, who as I've said is here as well, took part in all of the rounds. And I just wanted to draw attention that the data analysis round for me is called listening. It's important that it's considered to be listening. So over to you, Krysia.
Okay. So for the first thing that Donna-Lee did, which I thought was, as a participant, was really good, was that she designed for us. So there's a variety of things that she was kind of ways of thinking. She was thinking of collecting the data. So diaries, focus groups, interviews. Do you want it done by text-based? Do you want it kind of on a Teams chat? Do you want it on a kind of a Zoom chat, phone call? What would work best? And that kind of, that survey in terms of designing for us engaged us to found out how we wanted to take part, which I found really good. And obviously Donna-Lee came forward with some ideas of a kind of a structure of things that she'd like to cover with us. And we said kind of things that we thought were important, things we thought were probably less important, or things that had been missed out. So from the get-go, we were all very included in designing the research, but not just for our preferences, but also so that we could take part in the research as well. And I think one thing that came out and all of us kind of found was that we needed to have some sort of structure. And I guess when I say structure, it's probably more clarity in terms of what we're meant to be doing, how we're meant to be doing it, and kind of so everyone's on the same page rather than imposing this is what we're going to be doing. So we're very much, there was still this notion of choice within the structure, but it was very much in terms of making it really clear what was going on. And this was in spite of it trying to be unstructured. There was a certain amount of structure that was needed. And I think this very much felt that, certainly from my perspective, that we were being listened to and adapted for, because obviously I've taken part in quite a bit of research and I've done research as well. Yeah. And I'm very aware of the kind of being listened to and adapted for kind of dynamic. And I felt that really did happen in regards to the accessibility of this research. And I'm going to pass over to Donna-Lee in case there's anything extra you'd like to add in to what I've covered.
Thanks, Krysia. Yeah, I'll just continue with the next stages of the participant experience, which was seeing my own words was something that was discussed a lot when we did a kind of feedback round, in terms of both it being tricky to see your own words in taken out of context, but also an appreciation for seeing your own words and learning from other people's words as well. And just to explain a bit how we did the analysis, the collaborative analysis, I randomly selected statements from participants just by whether the words I or they were in a sentence, and then they were provided to participants to look at and then comment on in feedback meetings. And there was, like I say, there was a reflective process that happened within that for everybody involved. And there was very much a learning experience expressed of seeing how people experience things differently. And yes, that ultimately everybody felt like they had been heard, which is very important in listening to voices. And then a bit about my experience as researcher. I wanted to promote from the outset the sense of participants being the experts, so it being our project, not mine, and that I'm working with them, not for. Structuring to be unstructured, yeah, just reflects what Krysia was saying about a need for structure was very much expressed. But the reason I've termed it like this, the structuring to be unstructured, is because it needed to be individualized, and it also meant not removing choice by providing structure. So yeah, it was often it was about time frames, yeah, and clarity, like Krysia said. So this required me to be responsive, open and adaptable, to constantly be considering what was needed and listening to how everyone was getting on. At times, I experienced a discomfort in my role. In fact, at one point, I really started to question whether the project was too difficult. I think I was finding it difficult. And so I wondered if everybody was. When I expressed this to everybody, I was reassured actually that there was something about the way that I was adapting and appreciating the complexity involved in the group that was good. So I think the best way I can put it is I felt like because I was adapting as much as possible, I maybe was experiencing some of the discomfort that might generally be experienced by neurodivergent individuals having to adapt a lot. And so it became a change in a power balance that might be normative, and that was a good experience for participants and something that I came to appreciate. And that, yeah, it seemed like we all created solidarity together as a result.
So in regards to the different experiences, and this is probably the really interesting kind of meaty bit, as you can see from the various bubbles, that there were lots of different experiences that came out from the findings. And what I'll do now is I'll quickly read them in case that would be helpful for people. So first one says, I belong, I feel very accepted. I cried after the majority sessions because I felt like I didn't belong. Allow me to make decisions that I know help me best. Knowing there is support, if I did ever need it, is reassuring. I don't have to be a chatty or a neurotypical version of polite. And I can think of very few examples where I've had to adapt to neurotypical standards. And as you can see, they're all quite different and they're not all the same. And this led to the kind of the themes in the bubble at the bottom, which allow for the tensions within the kind of different opposing nature of some of the experiences, which were found to be kind of agency and acceptance, adapting and appearing normal, knowing and familiar, and marginalized and isolated. Go to the next slide. And as part of the analysis, Donna-Lee came forward to the group with the I statements, as she said, and the ideas of themes that the group came together with and kind of fancily named as collaborative themes, basically just the group's ideas of what they thought would be important to have as themes or be included in themes. And these included not belonging or being understood or feeling comfortable or uncomfortable, being made to feel bad for being different or having to fit in, the idea that reliable support was helpful and that educators didn't necessarily always understand difference, that things were inaccessible from time to time, that support should be individualised or person-centred, the fact that people managed and tolerated quite a bit, and there was a sense that overwhelm came through quite strongly, and also self-acceptance as well. And all these ideas together kind of reflected with the ideas that Donna-Lee had on her own, and these are kind of labelled as a fancy word, emerging, so ideas that Donna-Lee was having on her own. And these, or one of the main ones that she noticed was the amount of times that people were using certain words in their interviews. So people saying words adapt, acceptance, comfort, and knowing quite a lot. There was this idea of needing freedom within the learning environment, where rather than having to fit the expectation of being normal. There was this idea of comfort in knowing that support exists, even if it's not always accessed. And then there was a relationship between knowing and acceptance and freedom. And when there is knowing, acceptance and freedom, they resulted in comfort. And when there wasn't knowing, acceptance or freedom, there was this feeling of discomfort. And all these ideas together seem to link to the idea of acceptance and adaptation, which came through very strongly in the data.
Yes, thanks, Krysia. Yeah, just to reiterate, really, my emerging themes were yeah, what I had noted throughout initial impressions and then thematic analysis. But I didn't tell the participants about my emerging themes until after they had told me theirs, and it was really lovely to see how they reflected each other. Yeah, and Krysia referred on the last slide to about being able to get a sense of tensions in themes that were coming out, and that this was really important to acknowledge the differences in multiple voices. And when I discussed this with participants, the idea of having the umbrella theme of acceptance and adaptation felt like a way to not overgeneralize, to kind of keep everybody's different experiences being heard. Yeah, but to acknowledge that there's a tension between the idea of acceptance and adaptation. And so something for me, actually, that when I started the project, that I felt was important in terms of service implications is the paradigmatic framing. And by that, I mean the models that we work in, so models of disability, but also kind of what's involved in our thought production and our theory production. And so part of the topic guide created by participants also included this idea of thinking about models and what's influencing our experiences. And we very much, through the umbrella themes of acceptance and adaptation, it became apparent that where there is greater acceptance of neurodivergent individuals, it means that the individual has to adapt less. Or where there is greater adaptation by the institution, and when I say institution, I mean researcher or university. It could also mean, you could read that as neurotypical potentially as well. But where there is greater adaptation by the institution, there is greater acceptance of a neurodivergent individual. And the particular point in terms of paradigms or models in this is that where there is greater acceptance, we tend to be more within the social models or neurodiversity models, and where there is a lack of adaptation by an institution, it tends to be more within the medical model or deficit models. And I thought this was important to acknowledge, but also it's important to acknowledge that participants had an appreciation for all models, And so I also kind of had this idea that we're in a multiplicity paradigm when it comes to the models that we're working in, and it's important to appreciate all of them. Yeah, that medical model can be helpful in some ways, but it certainly has its limits too, and that there is more acceptance with the social and neurodiversity type of models.
And in regards to kind of the final key takeaway, when Donna-Lee and I were sitting kind of thinking about what we should present, we felt almost the takeaway was in the title with this responsiveness as responsibility. And I was going to spend a few minutes on this last slide kind of unpacking what that meant or what it might look like. So obviously this piece of research was situated in higher education, so some of the examples will be unpacked from a higher education perspective, but I personally, from my experience, I think this idea of responsiveness as responsibility can be unpacked across multiple places, multiple contexts, and it's just a matter of changing perhaps what kind of institutions, what kind of setting or environment you're in, and changing up the various people who are higher up the hierarchy or have larger amounts of power. And certainly in regards to power, certainly university staff, or the university as an institution, and that includes neurotypical people who are probably in the majority in university settings, do have more power, and there certainly is more in terms of they're higher up the hierarchy, and certainly the responsibility sits with them. And part of this responsibility involves a willingness to adapt, to change, to be open to new ideas. And I guess in terms of knowing how to adapt, a responsive commitment to active listening is needed. And I guess when I mean active listening, I mean not just hearing, but properly taking on board different people's lived experiences and an understanding and appreciation of the context and the power dynamics at play. And also, I guess also within active listening, it includes awareness and assumptions of kind of the normative practices within the university. So most of us who've been involved with various kind of bodies or institutions, and it includes universities, will know that they are incredibly bureaucratic. And I think certainly the bureaucratic practice is one element of that. And in part of being aware of the kind of normative practice and the culture within the university is part of being able to know how to challenge what's going on. So that involves kind of challenging the dominant approach. And very much in terms of what is sat with the individual, there is this real potential for reflexivity and adaptation. And so when I mean reflexivity, and I use this a lot in my work, and I'm aware it's a bit jargony and a bit academic, it's almost being able to sit and think about where you sit within certain positions, what privilege you may have, what kind of position you may have, what assumptions you may have. It's all that sort of wrapped in together, and being aware how it impacts what you do. And I think that reflexivity is really key in terms of responsiveness as responsibility. And I'll pass back to Donna-Lee in case she's got anything else to add in.
Thanks, Krysia. Right, that you've covered that nicely. I will just say that I feel like what came out of, what needs further investigation is what might be the barriers to reflexivity and adaptation and active listening in terms of normative and dominant models for working in service provision. I think we're out of time. Otherwise, I might invite Susie if she wanted to say anything. I think that's it for time now.
You've got a minute left, so go for it.
Susie, you don't have to. We haven't planned anything, but if you do have anything to say.
What I will say is that I really enjoyed being part of the project because, as Donna and Krysia both summarised there, I did feel listened to, and I was only diagnosed in 2017, and my experiences from that point have been quite negative until I returned to university. And even as a student, I have felt that a lot of my differences aren't accepted, and being part of this project, I really felt that Donna did her best to accommodate me and the difficulties that I have in terms of my experience, and I did feel listened to, and I think that's so important.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all three of you. Damien, hi there. Would our co-researcher group members also like to join us for question time? But that's entirely up to you. This is being recorded, just to let you know, but you are welcome to join us if you would like to. Our first question is from Anne for Donna. Donna, please could you expand a bit on timeframes? Just mentioned with structured to be unstructured slide. Time difference is big in both my lived experience and neurodivergent colleagues.
Yeah, so I think when I referred to timeframes in structuring to be unstructured, that there was sometimes a bit of anxiety around how long have I got to do this, or when does it need to be done by, how is the whole project going to be spread over a period of time. And so I would kind of responsively, it was important not to just give too much information as a kind of general, lots of information. So I would do it responsively if somebody asked, and try to keep a kind of simple overview of, it would be good if we could do this within a week, this part of the research, and this is probably what we'll do next, kind of thing. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Would anyone like to come in, Damien?
Just looking at the questions in the Q&A box. There's a question here. Thank you very much for this research. It is so very necessary. Do you have plans to put your research in place within educational establishments? So a way of implementing it in practice.
Is that to our presentation?
Yes.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Quite open.
Yeah, so like I said, we're kind of in a fourth round of independently collaborating now into co-authorship. So we would like to, we're kind of discussing the audiences that this should go to, and certainly education, not just in higher education, but in other places of education as well, have been discussed as places to present to. I think we're currently just thinking about putting together a publication, maybe for something like Disability Studies Journal. But yeah, that would be nice. There's a certain pace that we're working at because of the collaboration. We want to keep discussing it and making sure everybody's had the chance to contribute. I have presented to colleagues as well at the University of Kent, and I would like to do that more in other areas. So far, my colleagues have been a bit like preaching to the converted, because it is student support and well-being, people that are mentors and similar roles that probably come from a very similar position to me through the experience of working with neurodivergent individuals. So yes, but that's in process, and we're not sure how it's going to work yet. Open to invitations.
Thank you. Co-researcher group, and we have a couple of comments for you. So is the art in the presentation available to view anywhere?
Yeah, so we've got just a few of us on screen at the moment, but there are members of our group in the audience and others that couldn't make it today. So I don't want to talk on behalf of other people, but everything in terms of the art, the music, the singing, the poetry was produced by co-researcher group members or from people that were linked in with the different organisations that are part of the group. So for example, Jill's here from the Autistic Adult Choir, so some people have contributed there. There's Autism Voice, ALAG, Autism Hub, so people, you know, within our extended sort of group have contributed. I can make sure that the person that that done the artwork that I think you're referring to, I can share anything onto them. But as I say, I don't think they're definitely not on screen at the moment. But I will pass. I can pass anything on to them and link anyone.
Thank you very much. So if anyone does have any requests, please pop them over to me at events@lsbu.ac.uk. That's the email address that the confirmation email came from, and I can forward that to Rachel and the team. So
yeah, and I didn't know whether, Jill, you wanted to say anything about the choir, or if Mariama's still on screen, whether there's anything about Autism Voice in relation to the contributions there. So a massive thank you to everybody that's contributed. I mean, it's been so much wonderful work that's gone on behind the scenes, and really appreciate all the work. So yeah, I don't know if anyone else who hasn't spoken, part of the co-research group, wants to say anything about the contributions.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm here, I'm listening, and thank you very much to all of us for the work we did. So I have to say thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, would anyone else like to come in? Jill?
I can just, quickly say it was a pleasure to be part of this, and we tried doing something creative. I appreciate the feedback. So if we do this again, we can modify how that's done. It was our first attempt at something like this. So including choir members recording individually, and then we put everything together. So yeah, thank you for your support.
It was brilliantly put together, really, really creative and emotive and just insightful. So no, brilliant. Damien, was there anything you wanted to add?
I was just thinking with these collectivities, as it were, collectives, things I've been involved in the past and so on, it can be quite difficult managing group situations and different agendas and desires and so on within a group. Did you find any kind of problems or difficulties, and how did you manage that? Any tensions within the group? That's to both groups in a sense.
I think in terms of the co-researcher group, the most important thing was the building of relationships and getting to know each other, and making sure that from the start that we're clear that people could contribute and be part of the process in different ways. So it didn't necessarily, although there was a group of us that met every week and continue to meet regularly, there's other people that have contributed in different ways. And I think it's really been about, you know, thinking about people's, you know, individuality. And I don't know if Nick's here, but Nick really helped us in terms of some of our group agreements at the start as well, and having those discussions have been really, really useful.
Yeah, and I would just comment, like I said in the presentation, that there was a point for me where I felt like I was holding a lot, trying to listen to different needs within being collaborative, but that actually it wasn't experienced as difficult for those taking part. I think the key to that, if I don't know if Krysia and Susie would agree, but I think we kind of cultivated a respect throughout the whole project. So yeah, I'm not sure, is it Rachel, the person that just spoke before me? I'm not sure. As she said, I think listening to how people want to contribute. So sometimes when we were doing meetings, they weren't groups. Sometimes they were one-to-one. Sometimes people had videos on or not, and just being adaptable into how people were collaborating was key, I think.
I can see there's a question here regarding differences between the UK and North American universities, but I think this potentially might be better answered by some of our presenters later on today. So that might be something to bank as a question to reflect on differences between different countries and different systems.
I think certainly, although there'd be similarities in how it would be done, the system is somewhat different over there. Certainly from my experience of certainly having studied in France and in Germany, there'll be tenets of the bureaucracy, but it will look different.
You have different kinds of barriers and issues to deal with.
Thank you, everyone. We are close to our break time, so I'm going to call it there. Thank you to our co-researcher group, as well as Donna-Lee, Krysia, and Susie. Fantastic to hear from you all. We hope you can stick around. We are going to go to a short comfort break. It's 16 minutes past. Could I ask you to come back around 27 minutes past? Sorry to be so specific, but we will be kicking off just a couple of minutes early for our next session. So you've got just over 10 minutes for a comfort break. So enjoy it, and we'll see you shortly. Thank you.
Because I'm introducing yourself in your presentation. Is that okay? Yep. Great. Excellent.
Okay, so my presentation's a music, a love letter to the autistic community, critical analysis of an autistic perception of media representation. So I'm currently a master's student at Edge Hill University, and I'm studying Critical Autism Studies. My background's in childhood and education. This presentation today is some of the research I've been doing for my master's dissertation. Still a work in progress, and what I'm presenting today is my own perspective of what I have found as an autistic viewer of films. I'm not a filmmaker or a media researcher, but I do watch films and obviously have my own views. Some of these thoughts have been influenced by what I've read and from speaking to other autistic people whilst conducting my research. So I hope you find it interesting. Just going to give a brief background to the film and a quick overview of autism in films, and then I'll move on and discuss music more in depth. I'll then present my concluding thoughts on how filmmakers can improve what we see on screen and a final message to them. I also just want to reiterate that due to the content of the film music, some people may find the topics of discussion distressing. So I'm just warning you now, for the next few minutes, I will be showing the trailer for the film music. Please feel free to mute your computer if you don't want to listen.
All right, nearly here. My neighbor's passed out on the floor, and I can't feel her pulse.
Does the little girl have any family members we can contact?
Family members?
I can hardly take care of myself.
Come on, this is your responsibility. Grow up.
Hey, music? I'm your sister. All she's got now is you.
Hi there.
I don't know what I'm doing. I don't.
Music, it's your friend Ebo. I live next door.
Can you move in?
She can understand everything you are saying to her.
And if you are happy, press this one.
I am sad.
Very funny, troublemaker. She sees the world in a completely different way from us.
We're about to have a pool party. I am happy.
Can do this.
And I'm gonna help her just like she helps me. And I'm actually learning how to love because I love her.
So obviously this presentation is predominantly about music. The latest film to be released featuring a principal autistic character in the main storyline. Written by Sia, the Australian musician, it features her muse, Maddie Ziegler, an holistic dancer in the title role. Sia's called the film Rain Man the Musical, but with girls, and a love letter to carers in the autism community, which immediately tells you a lot about her perspective in writing the project. Features Kate Hudson as Kazoo, music's sister, who suddenly becomes the guardian of music, whilst also falling for their neighbour Ebo, who has some questionable ideas about autism and how to treat music, from having a brother in Ghana who was the same way as music. So before we really get into discussing music, I first want to give a bit of background. Autistic characters, or autistic coded characters, have featured in film for almost as long as we've known about autism. The first film I could find was Changing of Habit from 1969, featuring Elvis as a doctor who's presented with a non-speaking girl that has suddenly become withdrawn, presumed as a result of being abandoned by her mother. She's diagnosed autistic and then treated with rage reduction, and is apparently cured of being autistic and taught how to love by Elvis. Don't want to spend too much time talking about the problems I have with this portrayal, but this therapy is presented to the audience as a way to treat autism. And through showing us that they cured autism, it really sets society up for believing autism can be cured if you just find the right therapy. Even then, according to the director, it was a highly controversial therapy, but the crew took their direction from the doctor who was telling them he had cured many autistic children this way, and so we get that scene. Since then, there have been many films featuring autistic and autistic coded characters that I was able to find. I found 83 films from the past 52 years to date from all over the world, featuring 60 male and 27 female characters, and only 4 of the films actually featured more than one character that was autistic. Whenever filmmakers want to make a character quirky without working too hard, they use the autism trick. They create a character who is wondrous and just different enough from the average viewer, and whose features can easily serve plot advancement. So genius is used for problem solving, emotional detachment is used to create tension that can be built upon, and then tenacity and passion make them relatable and desirable. The characters are presented as mysterious, almost otherworldly, alien to the neurotypical characters, and/or what Stuart Murray calls the sentimental savant, a figure who displays the supposed savant abilities of the autistic person, especially in the realms of creativity and an understanding of supposedly core human concerns. Indeed, Murray states autism is the personification of difference and otherness, a person just like everyone else who is in fact nothing like anyone else, but rather subject to a condition that supposedly defies logic and understanding. It is, we are led to believe, the alien within the human, the mystical within the rational, and the ultimate enigma. So does it matter how autism is represented in films, how it's characterized? Does it matter what role the character plays within the film, what kind of interactions they have with other characters? Does it really matter if the character's male, female, non-binary, or other? Does it matter if the character speaks in full sentences, echolalia, uses an AAC device, signs? Does it matter if the character is played by an holistic actor or an autistic actor? Does the neurotype of those behind the scenes, of the writers, directors, producer, film crew, really matter? Why? Representations in any form of media are important. They play a significant role in shaping our view of reality, indeed of shaping reality itself. Movie quotes, music, phrases, they've all been assimilated in societal discourse. Music such as the Jaws theme tunes used for sharks. You don't have to have seen the original films to recognise the meaning behind the music. The same, unfortunately, now goes for Rain Man. I've no shame in admitting, before I watched Rain Man for the first time this year, specifically for this research, I had no idea that the nickname arose because Tom Cruise's character could not say Raymond. I truly thought they'd named the film Rain Man because that was a pre-existing colloquial term for an autistic savant. Prime example of how my sense of reality has been shaped by a film I'd never actually even seen. When members of certain social groups, for example autistic people, are routinely represented in a certain way, this creates stereotypes, which in turn leads to stigma. Goffman talked a lot about stigma, suggesting that someone with a stigma is, by social definition, not quite human. A sentiment I would argue that most autistic people are all too familiar with, and is echoed by the perception of the likes of Lovas. Autistic people have a history of being othered, treated as less than human, by many of the professionals claiming to be helping us, without media representations fueling this with their stereotypical characterizations of autism. Presenting autism as a devastating disorder, a burden, a problem, impacts societal views. Negative, wrong, or even just overly simplistic portrayals of autism in film lead people to hold false beliefs about autism, and autistic people inevitably have to deal with these false beliefs every day. For those members of society who have very little first-hand experience of autism, films can teach them how to respond to the autistic people around them. Seeing someone like Elvis seemingly cure autism in a film like Change of Habit sends a message to family and carers that they can also cure autism by following his example. When they're only presented with the positive outcomes, people are more willing to look beyond the possible distress being displayed and look towards the end result. At best, for the autistic people living with these societal responses, this involves having to repeatedly correct people's preconceived notions about them and their condition. At worst, it prevents them from finding employment, acquiring an education, accessing services, forming relationships, and potentially even resulting in their death. Of course, it would be neglectful not to mention the impact that these representations have on one's own self-identity. Seeing an accurate representation of oneself on screen is important for one's self-esteem, particularly when belonging to a marginalised or stigmatised group. Mayer found that people often rely on fictional media narratives as a primary source of information when forming their identity. Going back to my earlier point, media representations play an important role in shaping of our reality. For those marginalised and/or stigmatised, they may have relatively few people in their lives who are like them, even fewer that can be positive role models for them. Seeing oneself reflected on screen, especially in a popular film, sends a message to that person that they are valid, they are valuable just as they are. They can learn about themselves, and films model how to be. For example, Mayer found that members of the LGBTQ+ community learn how to be gay from watching fictional characters on screen. Martins and Harrison found similar in their study when they explored the impact of self-representation within films for gender and race. But it's arguably just as important to see ourselves represented behind the scenes in a variety of different roles. Seeing successful autistic people achieving both helps destigmatize autism and gives young autistic people who may well be experiencing the negative impact of being autistic in a neurotypical society hope that they too can go on and achieve. Typically, stigmatized groups fall into two types. One is a positive self-identity, by which an individual with a disability makes concerted efforts to minimize or downplay the stigma attached to their identity and is able to maintain relatively optimistic and confident attitudes towards the self. The other is a negative self-identity, by which an individual with a disability is unable to accept the harsh fact of their disqualifications and has a lower self-esteem about their self-image. Overall, violence of media portrayals of people with disabilities can impact the identity of the disabled community. So going back to my earlier point, does it matter? Yeah, it does. So I want to be balanced in this research, so I've tried my best to find some positives within the film. You may disagree with me, some of them may be a reach, but I tried to find some positive aspects from the film. The character music is non-speaking and uses an AAC device. I've heard it argued it's more difficult to portray non-speaking characters within films due to their interactions with other characters being difficult for typical audience members to follow. We've seen the success of A Quiet Place, featuring a deaf actress and minimal spoken dialogue. Showing this is not necessarily the case. For its faults, which I will get to, showing music using an AAC device within the film sets a precedent for future films that it is possible, whilst also showing those that may use such a method to communicate that they are seen. Music also seems to have some sort of relationship with other people around her, despite not actually appearing to engage with them directly, such as the person who gives her images of dogs, music's special interest, and Felix, the neighbour from across the street, who shines a torch through her window at night and using music. Felt this was a positive, as it shows that these people around her have taken the time to find a way to interact with music in a way that suits her needs and her interests. Music also appears to show a range of emotions, which was quite refreshing to see, and certainly different to the stereotypes of us being computational, robotic, and machine-like. Lastly, despite actively discussing music as if she's not there whilst on the periphery of the conversation, Ebo tries to educate Zoo about how music does actually understand and is actually listening to what they are saying. Found this whole scene really quite difficult to watch, especially given what follows. However, as I said at the beginning of this section, I was looking for anything I could take as a positive, and the content of the discussion is almost a positive, even if the delivery is way off. So I've already touched on some of where this film went wrong, and no doubt many of you will have read or seen some of the criticisms of the film and seen some of Sia's more questionable tweets. The film was written by Sia about 5 years ago and was never initially meant to be a film featuring an autistic character. Sia got inspiration after seeing an autistic person at her AA meetings and observing him. A fact that raises many flags for me around privacy and confidentiality, but that is another discussion for another time. She saw this person and decided that autistic people were the enigma, as alluded to by Murray, whose story she could tell. She exercised her privilege as an apparent neurotypical, which is open to debate, rich and famous person with the connections to create a film to tell a special abilities story, her words, as she saw it. A story of a mind trapped inside an autistic body, which through those musical interludes we can take a peek at. The inspiration cues, the garish and childish colour palette, the lyrics in the musical breaks, all serve to infantilize autistic people. The opening song says, "Body, don't fail me now. In my dreams, my body does not control me. My imagination sets my spirit free. Got to leave into fantasy, because reality is too much for me." Sia tries to show a contrast of what it is like being autistic in real life, and suggesting that within our minds, we are indistinguishable from our neurotypical peers. I can tell you unequivocally, that is not what is going on in my head, and it is not what is like in the heads of those who I speak to about this who are also autistic. And as is often the case of films featuring autistic characters, music served as a prop in the neurotypical story being told, creating a way for Sia to elbow in her music videos in garish fashion, albeit reminiscent of Sia's previous music videos. Sia's claimed on her since deleted Twitter account that she tried to cast an autistic actor in the role of music, but casting someone of her level of function was cruel, which goes against the interviews given by both Sia and Ziegler, who independently told the world Sia had written the role specifically for Ziegler. Ziegler created the caricature presented to us by watching YouTube videos parents had made of their children and posted on the internet, and reportedly even cried, worried about the reception she would receive from audiences. Despite Sia's claims on Twitter, and she made many, there is very little evidence of any actual autistic involvement, but of course no one really knows except for those involved. Despite my attempts at praise moments ago, music reinforces infantilized and marginalized perceptions of autistic people, othering the character, giving audiences the impression that it is music, autistic, that is causing the problems Zoo is facing in communicating with her. Zoo regularly invades music space, trying to get in her eye line and to supposedly make connections with her. Ebo tries to tell Zoo, within earshot of music, but not involving music in the conversation, that music can hear everything that is said, that music is seeing everything around her, which on the surface seems good. It appears to those who know no better to be great advocacy for us. Indeed, it's one of the few attempts of positive representation I mentioned earlier. But unfortunately, as I also mentioned, the delivery is off and the whole scene is ableist and degrading. The tone, the choice of words, and the way the camera repeatedly cuts to music to demonstrate the points Ebo is making only serves to further distance music, othering her. Milton's talked at length about the double empathy problem. The difficulties in communication are experienced by both people, not just one. Positioning music as different to the norm of neurotypicality tells audiences that the responsibility for any problems in communication is due to the autistic person, rather than a product of miscommunication and misunderstanding between two individuals. Earlier, I mentioned music's AAC device. For those who watched the trailer I shared, you may have picked up on her using it to say two phrases. I am sad, I am happy. Spoiler alert, but that's all her AAC device seems programmed to say for the entire film, alongside I am sad and yes and no, which Ebo feels the need to show her which is which. This is not a realistic expectation of someone's music's age who has already had the device at the start of the film and considering the length of the film. Despite using AAC myself sometimes, I don't want to claim to be an expert in AAC, so I want to share the words AAC users have said on this. AACs usually have thousands of unique words programmed, so the film highly underestimates the intellectual abilities of autistic people. One of the biggest problems the autistic community now faces is, like Rain Man before it, music has the potential to become synonymous with non-speaking autistic people, and that autistic people will be reduced to being seen as like Rain Man or like music. A non-speaking character was specifically used for this film to further emphasize the contrast between the real life and the fantasy life inside the autistic person's head. And so it would serve no purpose for Sia's story to actually have the character communicating. It is overwhelmingly clear that the whole point of music's character was not as a valid equal character, but to serve the love story. And finally, those restraint scenes. I don't want to spend too long discussing the restraint scenes in music. I believe most people here today know that prone restraints are lethal. Prone restraints are not illegal in the UK, although they are only to be used in extreme circumstances. Unfortunately, that does not stop people being killed through their usage. There is research that indicates that prone restraints in and of themselves are not what leads to the death of those being restrained. However, those were experiments conducted under controlled circumstances and are not reflective of real life situations. They also do not account for the trauma that is inflicted if one survives. Sia received a lot of criticism following leaked scenes of her film, showing her chosen response to an autistic person in crisis. Following this, she reached out to Communication First and asked them to support her by making an introduction to her film. She also claimed that a warning would be added to the start and the restraint scenes would be removed. Despite Communication First offering support, they were then ignored by Sia. The film was released without warnings and no scenes were removed. Communication First made the video available themselves on their website. I don't have time now to show you the video made by them, but I just want to repeat the words of American activist Cal Montgomery from within the short. Every escalation was blamed 100% on me, no matter if they had just done something illegal to me, cornered me, taunted me, taken something I needed, whatever. Your body is tensing up, your breathing tightens up, your fists want to clench. You can feel your body betraying you. You can fight or fold, it's up to you. You are hitting the ground either way. You are face down on the floor. You may relax, you may beg, you may play dead. None of it works. It is a fight with a predetermined winner who isn't you. When it comes to making a film featuring an autistic character, for reasons I discussed at the start, audiences need to see that autistic people are involved in every aspect of the creative process. There are many successful, famous autistic writers, actors, directors, showing us that it is not impossible to be successful just because you are autistic. It's so hard because many autistic people are scared to disclose to employers that they are actually autistic through fear of being discriminated against, and I don't mean to trivialize that. However, we simultaneously need those that are in a position to influence society to challenge those misconceptions. I will admit I don't know much about casting, but my opinion is that for an autistic role, autistic people will be the best choice. We know better than anyone what it is like to be autistic, and I feel that in addition to being seen, we are best placed to understand the nuances that come into creating an autistic character. It's not a case of us playing ourselves, as I've seen argued. The actors are still acting. But when casting directors are creating the criteria for their casting choices, autistic should be high on their list. If an autistic story is to be told, it needs to be told from our perspective. Neurotypical people do not know what our stories are without consulting us, and should not position themselves as if they do. We know what's important to us and the best way to tell it. Autistic people have a long history of being talked over and marginalised. Continuing that trend does nothing to support us. Filmmakers also have a responsibility to send the right message. As I've already discussed, societal reality is shaped by what we see on screen and has the power to influence and impact many, many people. Showing us being treated the right way, how we want to be treated, encourages others to repeat that in real life. If you're going to show us being mistreated, make it clear to audiences that it is mistreatment. use films to educate society on the consequences of actions that hurt us and model a better way. In terms of casting choices and characters on screen, we need to step away from the historical stereotypes. We rarely are the only autistic person in our families, in our social groups, so it's more realistic to have multiple autistic characters exist within the same film. Showing a variety of gender identities, of ethnicities, breaks down those classic stereotypes of autism being something that only exists in white males. And lastly, films should show a variety of communication methods, not just from autistic characters. Communication is not just the onus of autistic people, but everyone in society. Spoken language may be predominant, but many people sign, many people use devices, and we need to see that reflected on screen. Normalising these different things within films stops the stigmatising of members of society and sends a powerful message. Autistic people are not a novelty. We are just people, just like everyone else. Films need to show us as such to help reinforce the message advocates are sending. So what can society and future film writers learn from this experience? Films are extremely influential. Filmmakers have a responsibility to those they are portraying within the film to do it right. They need to change the narrative around non-speaking autistics and improve visibility for everybody. Autistic stories are not for neurotypical people to tell. We have stories just as interesting, just as important and valid as everyone else. And collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. And my references.
Thank you, Kirsty. Damien, over to you.
Thanks, Kirsty. That was a great presentation, and I've got to hold back my questions till later. But much of what you were talking about what's needed is a really nice way to introduce our next presentation. This comes from a project that I've had some involvement with myself in the broader project around it, Autism Through Cinema. But our next talk is about the Neurocultures Collective and co-creating a film. So over to you, Stephen and Sam, have with us.
Hi, do we just share our screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Share screen, and then if you have any videos or sound embedded, just hit the little two buttons at the dialog box that says share sound and optimize video clip.
So should we say hello?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, you want to start?
You can start.
Okay, I'm Stephen Eastwood. I'm an artist, filmmaker, and I'm also a professor of film practice at Queen Mary University of London. Over to you, Sam.
I'm Sam Ahern. I'm a visual artist, and I've done various advocacy work for people like Ambitious About Autism and the Autism Education Trust.
So can you see our screen okay?
We can.
Great. Okay, so we're going to sort of alternate speaking from slides to start with, just to give you a bit of background about the project that we're working on. We're actually doing a project, sort of in-person session here today, so we have a number of other members of the collective here off screen, which we're excited to share with you. And then the second half, we're hoping to kind of draw you into our sort of collaborative practice. So I'll start with the first slide. Neurocultures is part of the Autism Through Cinema research project supported by the Wellcome Trust. The project asks what kinds of moving images are possible when they derive from neurodivergent experiences. The focus of neurocultures is on how divergent creativity can subvert a neuronormative or a neurotypical cinema and generate progressive images, providing alternative readings and perspectives of being in the world. And this is our website for the wider research project that Damien mentioned, and Damien is a collaborator on, called Autism Through Cinema. If you just type Autism Through Cinema, it will get you to the website to tell you a bit about our project activity.
So the Neurocultures Collective was formed at the end of 2020 and comprises of 7 autistic artists: Sam Mahern, myself, Georgia Bradburn, Benjamin Brown, John James Ledlow, Robin Knowles, Anna Pama Mann, and Lister Cat, aka Lucy Walker. The collective is collaborating with artist filmmaker Stephen Eastwood to co-create a feature-length film working title Neurocultures, and a multi-screen gallery installation titled STIM Cinema, 1 shoot, 2 artworks. The Neurocultures feature film will be an experimental mix of documentary, sensory iconography, Auti activism, and B-movie horror. STIM Cinema will work with sections of the feature film to create a looping sequences such as small and large zoetropes.
So we've been working with this, and it's probably impossible for you to see because of the scale of this, but this is actually a very large image that has an incredible detail. We've been working with this visual collaboration software platform called Mural, which has completely, I would say, transformed the project and opened up how we can kind of bring ideas together. So this is a kind of like an aerial view of our mural, probably dated a couple of weeks ago. Because the design of the project was to use workshops, and actually, Sam, you attended one of the first workshops here, didn't you?
Yeah.
So we did do some in-person workshops before the pandemic, but then we had to figure out how collaboration could happen remotely. So we do a lot of Zoom sort of meetings, as does most of the world. But we discovered this platform called Mural, which is an online visual collaboration platform where people can log in from wherever they are and upload images, upload sounds, upload videos. It lends itself to visual thinking and bringing different creative perspectives and ideas together. So we've been meeting on Mural,
Twice, maybe 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's become quite a regular thing, which has been very, very good. Quite hard to get the hang of, especially if you've never used it before. But I think we're now kind of in the thick of it, which is a good thing.
Yeah, we found our skills. We've learned to back up our murals because they become increasingly vivid and populated. So we've got archives of the first murals that we had, and we're going to show you some of those. We also have started using Mural for every aspect of the project. So we have murals for each of the artists in the group's individual practice, and every 2 weeks we spend time in those personal profile murals. And we also have a mural for how the production is being structured, and we have a mural for how apprenticeships and kind of collaborations are happening with key professional roles. And we're here today to actually finalize the structure. I'm looking at Georgia and John James, because we're trying to consolidate all these ideas, but there are a kind of key structural principle is this kind of interlacing of sequences spiraling through environments. So this may give you a better idea. This is how long ago would you say, Sam?
3-4 weeks ago. We're going to show you what the mural looks like now, and it's quite, let's say it's quite intense to look at. So for those of you who find visual stimuli a bit anxious, this is going to be a bit of a shock for some of you.
Yeah, so this is a sort of an archived one. Okay, over to you.
We're within the mural, we're having look at a various number of different ideas and narratives that have been discussed by just the collective in general, and they are masking and camouflaging, critiquing the psychological structures that inform testing and diagnosis, rewilding societal spaces and with non-neurotypical gestures, shape-shifting states and metamorphoses, stimming, pleasure in repetition, and the fascination in recurring patterns such as the spiral.
So we also, one of the mechanisms that we used, although I think most people within the collective aren't big Facebook users anymore, but for some reason, Facebook became a way to sort of form relationships remotely before we got into Zoom and Mural. And now we're quite active on Facebook. And it's a kind of like a studio practice, but online. So people share images from their own work or share images from things that they found, memes, clips from other films. So this is just recently we did a sort of grab of this is probably a couple of days of uploads from people within the group. but I think it shows you some of our mural activity, but also some kind of recurring patterns and interest in forms. So I thought we'd just drop that in there. This was
2 weeks ago.
Yeah. What
It was our first person in meet, probably in about, I'm going to say, what, 6, maybe 5 months?
I think, yeah, half a year.
Yeah. So there was just the 3 of us, myself, Georgia, and Benjamin on the left there, and we went to Silvertown. We're also quite interested in looking at different locations for the film, and we had a very wonderful couple of hours in Silvertown and managed to get very, very wet, but also it was just a nice, dare I say, a kind of icebreaker, and it was a sort of very good way for us to get creative, but also get to know each other personally rather than just through a screen.
Yeah, we sort of went on a drift, didn't we, and started to think about how urban spaces, societal spaces use signs. I know that's something that's very, very key to your artwork, Sam, and kind of sort of construct how you use space and how you move through space and how you read, I suppose, how you read cities. So we were sort of gathering anomalous signs and, you know, gates that we didn't know what was behind.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, we were using wandering and sort of photography to start to sort of focus our practice, our thinking. So here is an example of one of our murals that we've used to think about apprenticeships to key production roles within the film, and also how we're using visual schematics to think about how films are scheduled, how films are researched, developed, planned and filmed, because I think often these structures can be quite intimidating and hard to understand. So mural has really helped us to break down what is a production manager, or what is a location recce, or what does an art director do, so that we can think through those professional spaces in our collaboration. Yeah, and I think we've covered most of it. Just to say that, so we have, as well as the co-creation space, we also have apprenticeships that we're putting in place. And here are some of the partners that we're working with. Damien already mentioned that, you know, he's been a wonderful advisor and kind of critical friend to the project. We're also working with Project Artworks, which is a charity based in Hastings that works with neurodiverse artists, and they're nominated for the Turner Prize this year. And there are some other partners and collaborators there. So I think that's the end of our slide. So I'm going to try to see, I hope this is going to work. See if I can get rid of that. So I'm going to try to share again our mural page. Bear with us. Anything else we've missed, Sam?
I don't think so.
Okay, so let's take us right into the middle. So this is kind of
pre-warning you guys. Quite intense visual stimuli coming up.
There we go. Can people see that?
I think so, yeah.
Can people see that?
Yeah. You can.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, we can zoom you out to, this is the global picture. And any thoughts on where we should go first?
Maybe personal profiles.
Okay, so up here we have...
Or we should just do a journey of the kind of how we started off.
Yeah.
And then take them around to where we are now.
So you can see that we have a section for personal profiles where people upload their arts practice. And yeah, what was it like for you? It'd be interesting to hear your perspective about you, because I think we created visual biographies, really, didn't we?
Yeah, I think it was a nice visual. I mean, I'm definitely a visual person, so for me it was quite fun putting this sort of visual mind map of myself together. And thankfully, quite a lot of the pictures, I say quite a lot of the pictures, you don't really need to talk as much because people can kind of see what your interests are, what your work is about, and hopefully where you get your inspirations from. So for me, it was a very good way of not having to explain verbally who I am, because I'm not very good at that. And actually, she says that. And it was just a nice, dare I say, a nice, easy way for us to get to know everybody, both personally as well as professionally, just in terms of what their work is like and what their inspirations are from. And I have to admit, I've learned a huge amount just in terms of getting to know the other 7 or 6 artists who we're currently working with, not only on their practice, but also just on where they get their inspirations from, and also what they enjoy doing, as well as what films they like to watch as well. There's been a number of films that I've now listed. I've got now a list of films that I'm going to be watching thanks to meeting the 6 artists. So yeah, I'd say it's been a very positive experience.
It's probably important to speak to, because I think we've worked out in the project that everybody within the project has different kind of preferences to how to share ideas, or how to, what sort of size group to that they feel comfortable in. And some people obviously prefer face-to-face or in person. Others, I think, have enjoyed the kind of the remote creativity. And so we have some people within the group that are much more studio based, and wherever possible we've been working within the studios at Project Artworks to sort of work to those needs. So we have different people, I think, gravitate to different kinds of interfaces, don't they?
Yeah, it's been a nice, I think, learning experience. Definitely just getting to know how different people's preferences are, not only in terms of communication, but what they feel comfortable with working wise. And I think that's been very important for them to share, because then that means that the work hopefully will be done within a very contained, I say contained, but a very good environment where people just feel comfortable, just in terms of A, how they can communicate, and B, what their working style is like.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a journey, hasn't it? Because I think we all have different comforts.
Yeah.
And some, you know, working with the mural, for some it was this expansive.
Yeah.
Like for others it was quite taxing.
Yeah, I think for especially the mural, because it's, if you don't know, if you're looking at it for the first time, it can be incredibly intense, because it's just this colossal of ideas and thoughts. It's a bit like a brain dump, as it were. And it's just now grown and grown and grown into this wonderful kind of organism of just thoughts and ideas. So now what you're looking at is the first mural, where it was a bit more, I think, a bit more structured, just in terms of we've got a variety of different colors, we've got a variety of different sections, and now I think we're trying to kind of get various ideas to interlink with each other, which then can hopefully make a structure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so these are earlier murals that were much more designed to get us thinking about the kind of film that we did and didn't want to make. And then there was a second mural that was much more, I guess, thematic.
Yeah.
Started to draw out individuals' sort of research and practice interests. So you can start to see how interest in the folk story of the changeling and a kind of autistic reading of that story. And then there's some interesting talk about horror, and horror being a space for exploring I suppose societal failings, or how society creates marginalized communities, but also thinking about architecture, thinking about wild spaces, and then to our structure, which, I mean, it's a bit like showing a messy bedroom.
It
the moment.
Like that, doesn't it? I feel a bit embarrassed, just because there's quite a lot there.
How can we characterize, because it isn't a messy bedroom, is it? But how can we characterize where we think the film is going?
I think, dare I say it, once we have we're getting the bare bones of a structure, which I think we've had very long, intense conversations on. I think because we want it to be, we want it not only to be right, but we want it to make sense to us as well. I think, dare I say, I think it's become a very, very experimental place, just in terms of, I think there was a time period where people were quite nervous about messing this up, because it was quite, if certain words and phrases were written down, they had to stay there. And now I think we've become a bit more relaxed in terms of how we use it. And I think that's definitely helping in terms of what this film is and what the structure is going to be and the ideas that we're thinking about as well. And also now we're finding that ideas are sort of slowly merging into other clusters. So we've got, for example, clusters on sleep and sensory differences and sensory experiences. And we're now kind of realizing that that can actually have impact on what we think about the changeling or rewilding, because they can all interlink together, and how that then can also influence space and fluidity of architecture. So we're quite, I think it's quite versatile.
Yeah.
Just in terms of not only the ideas, but in terms of where the ideas are now going. I think it definitely makes sense for us because we've been working on this for a long time. So to anyone who's looking at this now, it can be quite bewildering, I think.
Yeah, it's a little bit nerve-wracking, I think, to share the process at this point.
Well, yeah, I think because we're still in the very, very early stages of it, and so as yet we're kind of still working out the mechanics of this thing and trying to think about how this is going to work, just not only as a film, but how we then use co-collaboration as a process.
I think the task now is to translate this into something which can be filmed without losing the I think the kind of, like, I suppose the experiment, without losing those rich connections and sort of, so it isn't character based, I would say.
No.
It isn't necessarily.
It's not even plot based. It's just, I mean, we've been asked the question, what is this film about, many times, and I think we're still sort of thinking about that as best as we can. And it's kind of almost I mean, I would almost say it's an experimental film, but it's not even that, because it's sort of commenting on various different societal norms and societal beings, as it were.
Yeah, probably not too soon to define it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think my understanding is that it isn't that necessarily autism is the subject of the film.
No.
Although it does touch on a number of, I think, key kind of debates that have been taking place within the co-creation. So there's, to give an example, there's been a lot of talk about taking the Sally Ann test as one of these kind of theory of mind, a sort of a neurotypical construct of theory of mind, and sort of deconstructing it or exploding it or exposing its problems. And that's so that's,
but almost then taking that on its head and having the person who's getting tested be the tester, and then testing the doctor or the psychiatrist, and sort of doing a complete, sort of 180 approach and saying, okay, well, what is it about this that is concerning, as it were?
So I think that we're kind of coming to the end of, because I think we didn't want to overwhelm.
No.
Is there anything that we should touch upon that we haven't? I mean, the spiral is something that's coming through.
Yeah.
The
promise of a pattern, definitely.
Yeah. But you know, I think it's good. The other thing I think that perhaps is worth touching upon is that we've been evolving a kind of good practice. Everybody has sort of chipped in with ideas either through a remote Google document or in meetings to talk about how we listen, how we hold silences, because often there are silences in like Zoom and remote communication, or how we think about opinions. And that's also been, I think, really beneficial for the project, just to think about how creativity and collaboration can be really difficult, and managing sort of different perspectives. So and
expectations as well.
So that's become quite useful as a go-to, and it's we make mistakes, and we sometimes, you know, hit points where it's hard, and then we reflect on that and work it into our good practice kind of sort of evolving guide, really. So we're talking about complex, you know, different needs.
Yeah, you've got a thing now where, and I think this is really good, where if someone either says a name or a film or a word that people might not necessarily understand or know of, then for the purpose of the group, A, learning, and B, kind of understanding the context of what that person's referencing, we have to then explain either who the artist or filmmaker is or what that word means, and that actually kind of gives it a big, just a bigger, better group dynamic, because then we can understand what that person's thought process was and where they're coming from and why that person, film or scene, whatever, has been referenced.
Or also, I think sometimes we just find an image, and the image becomes the thing that we can focus on rather than the explaining or the discussing. So I think we're supposed to finish at 12:20. So I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add, Sam?
I don't think so, no.
But I hope that people aren't
too
bewildered. But I think that I should stop sharing now and hand back to Damien and Neil.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Damien, before we go to questions, I'll hand over to you for comments.
Yeah, that's some really two great presentations there, and very well matched together in terms of the topic. And just thinking about representation more generally, to me, the film music is so bad a representation that it's helping a kind of pivotal moment and change, I think. So in the criticisms of it, newspaper articles relating and referencing to the neurodiversity movement and community in the criticisms and taking it seriously. And this was very different to responses just a couple of years ago. And to me, it's so bad, it's almost having a good effect. So I don't know if Kirsty wants to start off with that one. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's been really good to having it so widely publicised. It's all over social media. Everyone's talking about it. But I have also seen the other side where people are still defending it, still saying, oh, well, my child's like this. And they're just perpetuating that narrative of, you don't know because you're not that bad. You're not nonverbal. You're not non-speaking. You don't know what it's like. So actually, this film is accurately representing my child. So it is difficult, especially when you are writing on social media and you're not speaking. People have this assumption that the people who are writing on social media are able to speak, don't have those like really high support needs or anything like that. No one's got any idea of what support needs I've got around me, what I'm like in my personal life when I'm not here on this screen. And it's really hard when you're trying to have those discussions with people who can't see you for how you actually are and are just defending their perceptions and their internalized ableism.
I think there's a lot of this kind of ideological defensiveness. I was attacked on Twitter only yesterday by someone saying I was a high functioning autistic and didn't know about anything about ABA that I was commenting on, which brought the comment. And it's these assumptions when I have an 18-year-old son with severe learning disabilities. I've been in this field for a couple of decades. It's amazing the assumptions people jump to. And I think media representations kind of validate people's experiences. Some years back, I did a short little look at the Louis Theroux documentary and responses to it. And many non-autistic parents were, as you say, empathizing with the parents in the program and the pressures they were under, whilst autistic people who watched the program were horrified by the restraint scenes and so on, and why nobody was saying, this is wrong, stop it kind of stuff. And so we're empathizing with the autistic children in the program. So this kind of media representation really is powerful, but it's what people read into it. Is their story being validated? So I should stop talking myself.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we've got some audience questions, but Nikki, I'm going to come to you quickly.
Just very quickly, absolutely brilliant. This is just a point of information. Neil and I have had a slight email exchange, and I am going to send across an evaluation form for you, but I'll also include some useful links. For example, Damien's and my publications are all available open access at our university, so if I put those links in, you'll be able to find them. So I'll whiz that across in a few minutes, Neil.
Thanks, Nikki. Thanks, Nikki. So let's get through some questions. So first one is for you, Kirsty, from Anne. Please, could you speak a bit more about how important it is to have autistic representation behind the camera at all processes of the film, processes of the filmmaking process? I feel this translates to a wide range of creative processes, including journalism and journalistic portrayal of autism.
Yeah, I saw that question and I've been panicking about how to answer it. I'm still in the process of working through my research, so I don't have like definitive answers that I can give to anything just yet. But from a personal perspective, it's not just about what we're seeing on screen. To normalize autism and autistic people, why shouldn't we be involved in every aspect? We're not just this person that needs fetishizing or something on screen for entertainment. We're just people and we need to be treated as such. And so to involve us in every aspect is sending that message to everyone, whether you're autistic or whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent or anything. It just sends that message that everyone is just people, and that's how we need to be treated.
Thank you. Would anyone like to come in on that? Great point.
I was thinking if Stephen and Sam wanted to talk about being behind the camera and the importance of that and autistic people in those roles. Oh, you're on mute.
I just wondered if we could talk about how people within the group have gravitated towards certain apprenticeships or to collaborate with. So we wanted to set up collaborations with the director of photography. What else?
There was editing, there was location scouting, there was the art department, sound design and recording, various other different production jobs, as it were, and just the importance of having people who were not only there kind of being present in the filmmaking process from the start, but also learning on the job as well, which I think is going to be really, really valid and really, really positive. And hopefully what we get out of this will be a very, very, I mean, we've not actually started the kind of apprenticeships, as it were. This is a very sort of new thing, but a very positive thing, because we're all learning on the job. And I think that's going to be really, really good, just in terms of us as not only creatives, but also for the people who we're going to be working with as well. I think that will be a really, really good experience.
Yeah, I should say that our production has been slightly put back by by COVID, but we're hoping to shoot towards the end of the year and to start those professional relationships, get those in flow in the coming months. Mm-hmm. And I think that there will be lots of materials within the film, because of our kind of experimental structure, that are sound or image, like moving image or sound materials that are generated by all of us as artists, by the collective as artists, as well as bringing in sort of key professionals like the director of photography, but also seeing those roles as reaching out to different communities, such as the neurodiverse community, for people taking up those roles. Mm. For things that require, you know, we may require sort of cranes or track, dolly and track, and this kind of stuff that requires certain kind of experience that we can benefit from.
We have a question here about, can anyone that is developing movie and filming ideas join this collective?
It's an excellent question, and we've worked with a process where, through a number of different workshops, people gravitated towards the project with, I think, a common goal or common interests, and the groups are hard to forge, and this group has found its way of working. And I think we have had people that that fell by the wayside, or people that wanted to join, but I think we've had to say that this is the group.
And also, it's just that I think it's taken us, like, in terms of time to get to know each other, that's been a sort of 5-month process just to get to where we are now. I'm not saying that people can't come. I hope they can, but I think it's just that kind of how would I say it? Yeah, just for the group to sort of work, I think it's definitely taken sort of a long time to get to where we are, as it were. I hope you can.
Yeah, and I one thing I think we can say is that we feel very passionate about and proud about the method that we've brought into being together. And I know that we've been talking to various people, including the Wellcome Trust, about holding or publishing that method that then maybe other people can take up. But I think that for the purposes of getting the film made, we have to stay within this collaboration and this collective for the time being. But we really want to share how we got here so that others can take up the model.
Thank you.
There's some questions that are more general, but I think I'll save those for half past, so we will call a break then, but I'll try and answer some of the questions that have been sent to me. There's one here though, how are you dealing with ambiguity? How do you imagine the project will finally coalesce? I think that's to the collective.
I don't have an answer to that question.
Watch this space.
I mean, it might be that often I think people, when you say documentary or when you say cinema film, people have certain kinds of references, but actually we have so many different ways of making films, and we have international cinemas, historic cinemas, we have art film that create all kinds of different possibilities for bodies that aren't about language, and that but often I think to give references, we have to go to what gets to the screen, and we want to get a different kind of film to the screen. So I think I don't think it will be so experimental that it excludes audiences, but I think it will be,
no,
yeah.
I think audience is the thing, well, it's definitely been a thing at the forefront of my mind, just in terms of A, how it's produced and marketed, and then B, who are we aiming this film at? I think that's a really important question to kind of answer, because audiences can vary.
Yeah.
And especially those where we're kind of almost merging audiences in a way, because of what we're creating and who is in the film and who is working within the film as well.
Yeah, documentary audiences.
Yeah.
I think different communities will find different things in it.
Yeah.
But I think the way we're seeing it at the moment is it will take us through spiraling through a range of environments and scenarios and scenes that I think deal with some of the key interests that we've come to find. So yeah, watch this space. I think it's probably Damien had it right.
Yeah, thank you, Damien.
Can we just say, are you going to save, because feedback for us is really important, and I know that we haven't been able to sort of read all the chat. Are you going to save that in some way so that we can access feedback, because it's really beneficial?
The chat will be saved and sent to Damien, so I'll leave that for him to disseminate. But yes, there's some great comments in there already.
Thank you.
I'll just say that we're running now into our lunchtime break. So our next presentations will start at 1 o'clock. I'll just, before signing off though, answer some of the questions that have been coming in as best I can. There was one around, do you think autistics are really able to imitate others and perform in movie and dramas? Well, I would say some. I'm not the best at imitating myself. I struggle with that. Although my father, who's probably autistic too, was an actor and director when he was younger. And there's many famous actors who have been diagnosed as autistic. Anthony Hopkins, Paddy Considine, and Daryl Hannah, and Dan Aykroyd, and so on. There's a comment here saying that lived experience of camouflaging and masking as an autistic person could in fact be an advantage for becoming an actor and interpreting characters. So there was also a comment there, during lockdown I've seen some great documentary filmmaking of many subgenres through Bertha Dock House. It made me wish I was London based, so they might be worth contacting. Production. And there seems to be an increasingly polarized toxic debate on social media within neurodivergent people themselves, as it's competing for authority on what is or isn't neurodiversity. I find this distressing and not constructive. How can we encourage more inclusive dialogue with people with different views? Difficult. Social media, I think, is always a bit of a shark pool. To make a kind of analogy, but and misinterpretation happens easily on things like Twitter as well. In terms of neurodiversity, as the term suggests, diversity, there's going to be different ways of making sense of it, different understandings. Within a very diverse group of people, you'll have differences of opinion and viewpoint, sometimes quite strong. And neurodiversity movements often portrayed as some monolithic one thought beast by people outside of it, when it's anything but in reality. Trying trying to be more constructive and inclusive and encouraging to people is what we try and do here with PARC events and so on. And I think practice what one preaches, try and live up to those standards as best one can. I know we all fall down at times with this sort of thing because we can all get upset as well by some of the things which are posted on social media or very much opposing views. But even with very opposing points of view, if you really look into the why of why people are thinking and feeling this way, you can get to a better understanding of someone's position. So in my PhD work with attitudes towards educational priorities, the reason why a lot of parents were trying to choose behavioural approaches and so on was not trying to cure or normalise. In the research I was doing, as an example, they were scared of a future where their child's needs were not being looked after in society. So they were resorting to a kind of resilience building ethos because they saw the society as basically unfriendly and unwilling to change and fearful of the future. So when you start understanding this reasoning, you understand why people are choosing different roads as paths, as it were, and can work better with people if you understand why. And I think we do need constructive dialogue across dispositions, across viewpoints, and so on, where possible. Sometimes the person you're conversing with has no wish to be polite or humble at all to you, like the person who attacked me yesterday. But then all you can do is kind of close it off. And I think when needed, the block button is a useful function on social media, and use it. So I hope none of us get blocked today.
I'm sure that won't be the case. We will break for lunch now. So there is we've got 22 minutes left. So please take a comfort break, go for lunch. Thank you everyone. Thank you everyone for joining. And we'll be back at 1 o'clock. See you shortly. Thank you.
So we're going to be joined in a moment by, apologies if I pronounce this wrong, but Marjorie DeSormo Moreau. Right? Yeah. And joining us from far away, from Quebec in Canada. So very pleased that you could join us today. And looking at an online support service by autistic adults to autistic adults. I like how you've crossed out provided on your title slide there. So over to you.
Thank you. So I'm really pleased to take some time to share our experience of a study where we wanted to capitalize on the interweaving of experiential, professional, and scientific knowledge to anchor our study in a citizen partnership. My colleague Isabelle Courcy is deeply sorry not to be able to join today. Sorry. In this presentation, I intend to address the steps in progress, as well as the means and strategies that have been set up to encourage not only active, but also meaningful participation with respect to all members' expectation. The challenges that we have encountered and that we anticipated will also be addressed. Our presentation's objectives are each participants be able to understand how the interweaving of experiential, professional, and scientific knowledge has allowed for the revival of the initiative Autisme Soutien, which in French stands for Autism Support, while allowing to document its development and implementation, as well as to discuss ways to ensure a collaborative and citizen-based approach to both in the design. To do so, we have decided to adopt a narrative approach to tell you about the experience of the initiative Autisme Soutien, as well as its rebirth and court in the interweaving of different kind of knowledge, which has and is still an essential condition to foster the participatory roots of the study. So to start, just a bit of background. In Quebec, which is a francophone province within an anglophone country, so Canada, there's a lack and a mismatch between autistic adults' needs and the support services that are available. A situation that is not that we are not the only one to face in Quebec, but is also pretty much worldwide. It's not surprising since they are rarely involved in the design of services intended for them. There's also serious issues in service accessibility, complementarity, and continuity. Also, there's almost no available public services for autistic adults. When autistic seeks psychosocial support from general services, many professionals feel that they're not well trained enough and often refer them to psychiatric or rehabilitation services, which don't meet their needs for information, emotional, and social support. While most support and service most support and services that are available to autistics target deficits or behaviors, it's rather social isolation and social I'm sorry, it's 8 in the morning here, and it's time to go to school for my daughter, so she wanted to say bye. So well, I'll just start back with that. So while most support and services that are available to autistics target deficits or behaviors, it's rather social isolation and social disaffiliation that negatively impact on autistic people's mental health, stressing the mismatch between their needs and the supports available to them. 92% of the participants at the last Quebec Forum on Autism called for a diversified range of services to be developed in a concerted manner to meet the specific needs they, autistic adults, encounter in their various spheres of life through their life scores. Their need is this need is all the more pressing as research paints a most worrying and alarming picture of their situation related to many issues: social isolation, sometimes even complete social disaffiliation, mental health problems, and a low level of self-esteem. Autistics are also 2.4 times more likely to commit suicide before age 24. Yet, over 60% of them do not receive any mental health services. As highlighted in a recent Canadian report, developing appropriate and accessible mental health support services for autistic people must be a priority. While many autistic adults are neglected by formal support services, online exchange groups are numerous. As a matter of fact, since its inception, the web has provided a prosthetic framework that binds isolated and socially unfit autistic people together. And I'm quoting here Judy Singer. Active and significant presence of the autistic community online is well known, and it's not uncommon for the web or social media to be autistic adults' sole source of support. Initiative aiming to provide online support by and for autistic adults are being implemented around the world. Our research collective is driven by the goal to set up an online social support platform designed by autistic adults for autistic adults and aligned with the needs and demands of the Francophone autistic community in Quebec. But how did it all begin? In December 2018, Autisme Soutien was launched by Catherine Aubry, an autistic woman and mother of 2 autistic sons. At first, my own personal implication in this was as an autistic adult myself, volunteering to provide online social support to other autistic adults. Autisme Soutien provided free, confidential, geographically accessible support to autistic people in their diverse realities and various experiences through an online platform. This support was provided not only for autistic adults, but also by autistics. Support was provided synchronously by chat as well as asynchronously by email. It was logistically inspired by other well-established online support initiatives developed in Quebec for parents and teenagers in general, not specific to autistics. It was a groundbreaking initiative, and as far as we knew, there was no other Francophone service of this kind available at that time for autistics. Still, Autisme Soutien was shut down after 6 months, mainly due to a lack of funding, as well as volunteers' unmet needs in terms of training, as well as support in their role. Volunteers recruiting was also a challenge. At that time, Catherine was to operate the support service, that is to say, managing the online platform, recruiting, publicizing the service, and so on. She was concerned that publicizing the need for volunteers would draw attention to the service and therefore increase the demand for support, which we couldn't meet. It was this chicken or eggs situation. There was also a recruitment issue related to the fact that volunteers might have at that time to provide social support to a clientele that might be either autistic adults or non-autistic parents, which non-autistic parents of autistic child, which not all were necessarily willing to do so. Some didn't want to expose themselves to the discourse of some non-autistic parents who could, in their need to vent, sometimes express themselves in ableist terms. Faced with these challenges, research was seen as a good means to give a second wind to Autisme Soutien by making it part of a systematic process. Based on Catherine and I's discussion, it was decided to take a step back from the initial initiative in order to revisit the way the service had been conceptualized. Since Autisme Soutien was created with a by and for vision, it was obvious to me that its anchoring in the autistic community should also be translated into research. Contrary to what is often described in the literature, that is to say, research priorities not being aligned with those of the autistic community, the contingency of the events and the willingness of the actors that were involved allowed for a participatory and citizen study approach. In order to revive Autisme Soutien as part of a research group, I contacted a colleague whose research interests were related to autism, thinking that she might be interested in conducting the research project. At that time, my own research projects were not related to autism. So even though I saw great benefits to such a project, I did not feel legitimized to conduct the study myself. This colleague, Mélanie Couture, also from University of Sherbrooke, just as I am, didn't want to take ownership of the project, but instead encouraged me to lead it myself and preferred to act as a co-researcher. One thing led to another, and we invited other researchers as well as autistic citizen partners to join us. Through our meetings, we discussed the notion of expert, which made me reflect on the crossing and convergence of my knowledge. I eventually came to realize that it's possible and it was acceptable to cross knowledge acquired based on my personal interest and experience of autism with my scientific and more specifically methodological knowledge. Through meetings, there was a clash between the social emancipatory framework and the biomedical one. One of our group members often questioned the fact that autistic people could efficiently organize themselves to provide such a social support service safely. That person argued that the involvement of biomedical professionals, indeed medical doctors, was essential in order to provide a safe social support to users. Such a discourse turned out to be in contradiction with the position of all other group members, as well as with our vision of the project. Our debate on this point ultimately consolidated for us the relevance of a by and for autistic students, as well as the participatory and citizen approach anchoring of the study. Our discussion also confirmed my desire to set up a research collective in which autistic members would be overrepresented. Non-autistic members agreed. In fact, they saw it as a relevant strategy that would ensure and defend, if necessary, the decisions and self-determination of autistic members involved in the project. Our collective is actually made up of 5 autistics and 3 non-autistics, including an autistic researcher, which is me, 4 autistic citizen partners with various backgrounds, including professional knowledge in peer support and experience knowledge in the management of autisme soutien. 2 non-autistic researchers are also in our group in sociology and occupational therapy, as well as 1 non-autistic research coordinator. And I'm very happy that we were recently able to hire an autistic research assistant. Our project consists of 3 phases actually. The planning phase is currently underway and involves the evaluation of autistic adults' perceived needs in order to inform the development of the support service. Community and clinical settings consultations has also been done to ensure the complementary of the service resulting from this project with those of the current public health services and community services. The development phase is planned for next fall. It will consist in the conceptualization of the online support service. A prototype will be developed and tested for functionality by potential users, volunteers, as well as social support seekers, and improved based on their feedback. Finally, the implementation and evaluation phase aims to analyze the facilitators and barriers to the implementation of the social support service, as well as its impact among the user, social support seekers, and volunteers. This last point is very important to us. From the beginning, it was important for us to establish group processes where there would be horizontal and no hierarchical relationships. The equal representation of researchers and citizen partners, as well as the overrepresentation of autistics, was intended to contribute to this. A few meetings were held with no structure other than an agenda. But it soon became clear to us that this wasn't the best way to proceed. In fact, one of these first meetings wasn't satisfactory for some members who addressed their dissatisfaction and discomfort to me as the project's principal investigator. We then felt the need to take a step back and ask ourselves, what are our expectations and needs? Doing so highlighted the need to formalize our group as well as its functioning. We looked at our structure and processes as a group and decided that our committee would be led by, as well as working toward a collective goal, that is the development and implementation of an online support service that would be provided by and for autistics. Some members initially had concerns about decision-making because of what they had read. are also, for some, experienced in other projects. We formalized that our group would rely on co-construction and shared decision-making. Decisions are taken by consensus or by majority plus one if it's not possible. The fact that the autistic members are overrepresented ensures that no decision can be imposed by the non-autistic members, which was fundamental to me. All members agreed on the importance of recognizing and respecting the value of the different knowledge brought by the members, whether experiential, academic, professional, or scientific. We assume that each member can bring different type of knowledge. Our analysis of the expectations expressed by the committee members could be associated to three main themes. First, that everyone be aware of what is being done in the project, which implies communication and information flow by the means of several types of communication. Second, to facilitate and the functioning of the committee and the achievement of the common goal, for which we needed an operational and organizational framework, as well as a clear role, clear roles and tasks that we can reevaluate on the way. Third, and lastly, to create and maintain a climate of co-construction for which validating everyone's understanding, equal communication, and other values were identified as essential. A space was open to discuss everyone's proposal, which was pretty much similar and even overlapping on concrete operating modalities. We also put in place specific means to facilitate exchanges and respect everyone's need, even if they sometimes were competing. Our research collective and operation charter governing was thus created and adopted by all members. Up to now, our experience has highlighted the importance of creating time and space for broader shared reflection and invisible work that is necessary to establish relationship and to make sense in the process as well as between preceding meetings. To do so, a formalized approach has been followed between two researchers, that is me and to reflect on our situated positions and to discuss and unravel possible imbroglios. Between all members, everyone being invited to keep a record of their individual experience in the research process in any way they wish, written, photos, recording, visual art, etc. An informal approach is also intertwined between the autistic researchers and the autistic partners. And this is done to cross-check information, to make inferences, to deepen reflections, and decontextualize, while contributing to strengthen relationships and gain depth of thought. Although invisible, these formal and informal approaches has proven to be important to building trust, helping each other within the collective and sharing information. At the end, what have we learned so far? First, hidden agendas. Members can be tempted to use this initiative to further other research or activist projects, whether consciously or not. Also, pressure to adopt a biomedical approach of intervention and funding issues, because the budgetary rules for funding don't always allow for adequate and sufficient remuneration for partners and fail to value their unique expertise. Simultaneous use of different communication mechanisms and building mutual trust, especially between autistic and non-autistic members, requires extra time and efforts. We also need to remain vigilant and alert to fault lines between groups, autistics versus non-autistics, researchers versus non-researchers, by making sure to consider the arguments being made, not the people making them. Finally, questioning from the outside of our collective about the positionality of the autistic researchers, so mine, has also proved to be an issue. While the intersectionality that characterizes my dual positioning as a researcher and as an autistic reduces the risk of bias. It also exposes me to a double the risk of rejection, that is by the autistic community due to the privileged position of researcher, and by the academic community, where my knowledge is often questioned by specifically mentioning my autism, which raises the issue of epistemic injustice documented and shared by other autistic researchers. My involvement in this project as an autistic researcher is a political standpoint that I felt was important to make. It implied disclosure among my scientific peers that I was and still remain ready to assume, as collaborators and other players questioned the legitimacy of my involvement in such a project because of my belonging to the autistic community. Although my rigor and research skills had never been questioned until then, I can't help but think about the impact of related unintentional attitudes or assumptions over my career progression, if only through peer review processes. My involvement in this project has also led to an unplanned coming out, thank you, in the autistic community. As a researcher, I feel that it did lead to a perceptible change in the perception and demands of some people towards me. My knowledge of the academic and pedagogical world being now frequently solicited for personal motives, which might sometimes be source of discomforting or impotence. Despite the ups and downs, we believe that up to now, our group had proven to be able to respect, value, and capitalize on the interweaving of knowledge, which is a success. We believe that it bodes well for the continuation of our work, as well as the development and implementation of Autisme Soutien. Thank you for your interest and listening.
Perfectly to time there, Marjorie. Thank you. I'll hand over to Damien to introduce our next speaker.
And just before Neil, I'm struggling to stop my my screen.
There you go. That's done for you.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, Marjorie. So we're now going on to our final talk of the day. And so I'd like to introduce to you Max Field Sparrow, who's just joining us here now, for a talk about autists serving autists, transforming services by removing barriers. So over to you.
Hello, I hope there aren't huge fans of slide decks here because I have a long tradition of not using slide decks. I find them kind of distracting, so I apologize if you don't like that style. What I am presenting on is basically my life's work. Where I'm at right now is the culmination of about 2 decades of work. And what I am presenting is not just a thesis, but also a call to action that I hope I will provide significant evidence that it will spread and more people will take up this vision. To start, for my introduction, I want to talk about who I am, where I came from, who I am now, where I'm going. And I really want to thank, I don't think she's still here, but Cairi McKenzie really paved the way by talking about what growing up autistic with services can be like. For those who weren't here for her talk, she painted a pretty grim picture, and I'm here to say it's a pretty honest picture. I was diagnosed at age 7 and had a very confusing childhood because I grew up at a time when nobody told their child what their diagnosis was or why they were going through all these things they were going through. I came out of that pretty radicalized, and I feel like I'm still pretty radical, although my life path is taking me in a course where I have to find ways to be more moderate, to get things done. But I came out of that as an activist, as a writer, and particularly outspoken against behaviorist, especially ABA treatments, which I will disclose I still am anti-ABA, but I now work with BCBAs and other behaviorists, and more on that in a moment. But where I am now is actually working for autism services. So I both was a recipient and now a provider of services. So I'm seeing it from both sides. And I ended up where I'm at. I'm at a pretty progressive place. I'm working as a DSP, that's a direct support professional. I'm working directly with people with IDD, many of them autistic. And I ended up here because someone who has worked here for about 14 years, I think, for a very long time, read my writing early on, and and they are autistic. It was really helpful to them in their life. So when they saw an opportunity to try to bring me into where they were working, they jumped on it and they sold me on the place. And it's not perfect, because nothing is perfect or ever will be, but it is a very progressive place. And as a result of working here, I see glimpses of what we could have, as well as I've been able to put some of my negative experiences into a larger context. Where I want to go, my life mission, where I'm moving to from here is I want to become a poetry therapist. I want to get a clinical social work degree, get certified as a poetry therapist, and work with disabled populations, especially autistic people, supporting, uplifting, and promoting disabled voices. Now, the problem that I'm seeing in services for autistic adults, the biggest problem is ableism. And I know that I don't really need to talk to this audience about what that is. I do want to say, however, that I have come to realize there are two major kinds of ableism. One is the really malignant ableism that we still do see in services. We see abuses of people. We see stagnation and warehousing from just a very malignant view of people with IDD. But there is also what Dale DeLeo calls benevolent ableism. And he defines that as when well-meaning people set up programs or services that also segregate or send messages of stigma due to using disability as the defining core of the services, rather than such things as individualism, quality of life, informed choice, and inclusion. And Dale DeLeo also talks about structural ableism that is found throughout. He refers to these services as the disability industrial complex. He says it's an insidious bureaucracy of traditionalists funded by methods that serve the status quo. And what I'm seeing right now happening here in the United States in autism services is a clash between this structural ableism, the benevolent ableism of just paternalism, and this incoming more progressive view that is being led by autistic adults to create services that truly serve people, that serve their goals, that get them out into the community, truly integrated, not segregated. And my thesis is that a just future for autism services requires a shift to at least 51% autistic employment at all levels in all agencies and policymaking bodies. Because until we have a majority of autistic adults leading services for autistic adults, we are always going to be second-class citizens and viewed as unsuitable to be the protagonists of our own stories and our own lives. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why I feel it is so important to have such a heavy autistic presence in autism services. A majority of autistic employees in these fields will redefine who is offering quality services between the work that we do, the way that we're written about, and the research that will be done as a result of this movement. My hope is that we will create more and more demand for autistic employees by promoting the positive qualities of autistic workers in the services field, and people will recognize the necessity of our presence. Because who better to help clients find and keep satisfying employment and address issues with executive function and timeliness, as well as figuring out and advocating for the accommodations that they need, than a fellow neurodivergent person who has faced those same issues and struggles and prevailed in their own life. Autistic employees in services are not only bringing their autistic selves to the work, but serving as concrete examples of what autistic people can achieve. They're leading by example as well as by mentorship. It will transform the field, especially if we bootstrap employees from within, as well as placing workers elsewhere in other jobs and bringing people from outside in as employees. It is so important that we always watch for talent to hire from within, because among other things, what happens when we do that is we blur the line between employee and client. And an autism service provider becomes more of a mutual aid society, and everyone is giving according to their skills, receiving according to their needs, and this line blurring reduces the us versus them attitude that is fueling the benevolent ableism, and it also queers the power dynamic between the service providers and the recipients, which is so necessary. So many speakers before me today have talked about that power dynamic, and I think that is something that will really help knock that down, is when it's no longer we're helping those people, it's we're helping ourselves. We're bringing our whole community up. It takes more awareness and dedication for a neurotypical service provider to overcome their learned ableism than an autistic worker who is still going to have learned ableism, because we're all embedded in this ableist society. But autistic workers are more likely to have had similar experiences in their own lives, making it almost effortless to empathize with their clients, because it just hits home so hard when you've lived it yourself. So much of what's happening, or what should be happening, in autism and other IDD service industries is relational. And how do you teach people how to have a relationship? That's always the conversation about us. We have to teach autistic people how to have a relationship. But I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the double empathy problem. And Damien was talking about it earlier, and being the primary researcher in that work. The problem is that when all the service providers are neurotypical, you're having to teach them how to have a relationship the same way they've been trying for years to teach us how to have a relationship, because they don't know us. They really don't. They try, and some of them do an amazing job, but it is so much easier when you start with someone who is neurodivergent and more likely to understand and empathize because of similar neurotypes. There's been all kinds of research that shows how hard it is for neurotypicals to genuinely empathize with us. There was Shepherd, Nottingham, and Heesum at London School of Economics, Sasson at University of Texas. Their research was showing that non-autistic people were not able to read the emotions of autistic people very easily, and that they were forming negative first impressions of autistic people. In 2017, there were thin slice studies where the researchers, not just from University of Texas, but also Indiana University and Emerson College, there were 3 studies that were then combined in a meta-study, and it found overwhelmingly that the first impressions people have, even from the thin slice, just the briefest second of exposure to an autistic person that they didn't even know was autistic, was negative. People were saying they didn't want to know these people, they didn't want to be friends with them. So that's a huge barrier that neurotypicals have when they come to this work, that something about how society has shaped us, or ableism, something that we haven't yet gotten to the root of, is getting in their way from viewing us as full people and as full participants in our lives. So some of the barriers to getting this large number of autistic service workers, and ways that we can consider navigating them. A big barrier that I see that I would be remiss if I didn't talk about is my fellow autistic activists. There is a lot of very black and white demands out there. There is a large cry to outlaw ABA and remove behaviorism like overnight. That's the demand I hear a lot from my people. And I was making that demand too, until I came and worked in services and realized a few things. One of them being that behaviorism is incredibly pervasive in the industry. I work in the state of Colorado, and the state has a law that says that anyone providing services to autistic people has to have a certain amount of training in behaviorism. And so when I first came here, that I was shown a video training that we have gotten rid of because I complained about it, and other openly autistic employees looked at it and said, no, yeah, we're getting rid of this. It's awful. My nickname for that training was "Don't feed people dinner so that you can bribe them with crackers to stop looking at the ceiling fan." And I was absolutely appalled that that was the baseline level of behaviorist training in my field. And people are coming into this field, into jobs like mine, with no education or experience. This is entry-level work, and that's what they're getting told, is that people can't look at the ceiling fan, and don't feed people, or you won't be able to get them to do what you want them to do. That in an industry that had a majority of autistic employees, these videos would never exist. What I am now being trained with is a service called Open Futures that is both amazing, and I'm told it's more expensive. So it's going to be harder to get it into services, but so many of the training videos are made by disabled people, both in the writing and in the presentation, and I've been favorably impressed with what they're doing, and that is something that we need more of. We need autistic people making these training videos. But as a result of seeing what I was up against, that behaviorism is everywhere, I liken it to the root ball that's holding the soil of the services together. There is no way to just strip that out overnight without just removing all services. And it would be like people talk about the service cliff, where you turn 25 and there's no services anymore. That's what we would be doing to thousands and thousands of people. We would just be ripping up all the supports in their life, nobody to come help them keep their house organized, nobody to help them find jobs. It's not a viable solution to just rip things out like that. And that may mean that we have to work without the outspoken radical activists on our side. I think there are ways We can win those people over, but we may have to just move forward with the work without them, because this does require incrementalism, and that's not very compatible with a lot of radical thought. But change has to happen, and I've come to the point where I've realized that saying get rid of everything overnight is not going to change things in a positive way. Another barrier is ableist hiring practices. I was trained in a vocational training called Employment First, which what's even more important than the techniques they teach, which are really great job finding, placing, and shaping skills, is the attitude that underlies it, which is that anyone who wants to work can work, and there is a job for them in the community, a real job with real pay, and this is what people deserve. All people deserve to not work in sheltered workshops, to not be forced to be warehoused, or their only option is to volunteer. People can have real jobs. And getting rid of the ableist hiring practices is an important part of that. It all feeds into it. An agency that has overcome those ableist practices, like job interviews, are terrible for autistic people. That's the worst way to bring people into a job. And the more that companies work on using these techniques, it's going to feed back into having a better employee base, and an employee base better suited to helping other people find employment. There is the glass ceiling that makes it harder for all marginalized people to rise up in positions of leadership, whether it's people of color, women, and of course, autistic people. I'm seeing more and more openly autistic people working as behavior techs or DSPs in these low entry-level positions. We need to make this truly a revolution. We need to have representation all the way up to CEOs of companies. And in an environment where people feel safe to disclose their diagnosis or their self-identification, because without that disclosure, we aren't going to see the effects that are, because we won't be visible. We have to be visible, which means that we have to deal with ableist workplaces, and work on reducing the fear of disclosing in the workplace. What we're doing here in my workplace is lots of trainings that people have to go to, not just on ableism and the history of IDD services, but we have experts, meaning own voices, coming in to teach about things like gender variance, because that's a really important issue. Autistic people have a much higher rate of gender variance than the general population. So we're actively educating our employee base all the time. And finally, we need hiring input, and we're working on this here. We are not there yet, but we are talking about how are we going to implement this. We need hiring input from clients themselves. It's part of dissolving the boundaries between the client and the employee, bootstrapping autistic people into the workplace, and giving people an active voice in how their own lives are conducted. We have client members on our board of directors, and we are working on getting client members on the hiring board, having a voice on who comes in to the company. So that's pretty much it. That is what I've been working on, and what I would really love to see lots and lots of people working on, because true autistic leadership in the autism services industry is a way to achieve true compassion without pity, true justice, and even corporate efficiency, because we're going to have workers that are so much better at their job because they're working from a place of knowledge, experience, and passion that is going to be really hard to find in people who aren't autistic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am just going to change it to gallery view so the audience can see all of us for the closing. There you go. That's changed. Fantastic. Damien, before we hit the audience questions, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, it's both really good presentations, and the parallels with the UK are very strong, and very similar issues, perhaps not quite so embedded in some service provision in the UK. But one of the things that's pervasive, I'd say, now in the care home kind of sector is a PBS model, positive behavioural support. So through the learning disability, intellectual disability route, the behaviourists have kind of become dominant now in that area. And my own son is now 18, has severe learning disabilities, and is facing this in terms of service provision. And I think what you were saying and presenters earlier today, the kind of deficit behavioural model that's throughout these systems. And in the UK, I think we're starting to get some headway in education. Still a long way, though, in health and social care. Is a really big problem area to me. And someone asking the questions, is it likely the UK will develop an autism industrial complex similar to the US? We've got a raging one already. It's been going for years, I'm afraid. And I think this is another one of the problems is the exploitation and token gestures from certain organisations in this industrial complex, and really battling against that a lot of the time. So if you've got any comments about any of those issues, then either of you, we'll start with that. Probably not there.
Who would like to respond first?
Could you repeat the question?
It was kind of, well, more to sort of discussion point around the prevalence of the behavioural deficit model and how we can be exploited by organisations with token gestures and so on, and how to get past the token gesture.
That is an excellent question, and I see that all the time in my work where people are using the language of liberation to plaster over doing the same old thing. Some people call that neurodiversity light, but I don't even think it's neurodiversity. I think it's more like cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
And that's where having more autistic people working in these fields will help to get rid of that, because we see through that so quickly. We see, oh, those are pretty words, but look what you're doing. And so, yeah, I think that is the big answer, that yes, that stuff is still rife everywhere and needs to be rooted out.
I agree with what you just said, and I think, well, personally, I think it's important not to accept to be part of any kind of project and initiatives where people want to where people want to say that it's autistically driven. For example, I'm sometimes approached by colleagues or other researchers that are saying that they want to that they'd like to engage in projects that are going to be participatory focused, but actually the only thing that is going to be autistically driven, and that is me being a part of the project. So when it's the case, well, at first I can educate people. I can explain what is a real participatory project and why it's important to be that there's more autistics in the project than just me. As a researcher, I am an autistic, but I'm also a researcher. So you can't invite me in your project because I'm autistic. Because I'm autistic, you invite me in your project because I'm an autistic, and I'm gonna bring my insight, my personal, my experiential insight. But if you'd like to have some citizens in your project, well, you need to go and get them. And if it doesn't make sense for them, well, I do not accept to be part of those kind of projects, and I just leave those projects, because I think it's a responsibility that I have. If my name is associated to a project, I think it's important to be really participatory driven, because I do not want to be used in order to justify, or in order to validate projects that are tokenizing. Is that a word? Yeah, autistics.
Yeah, I find though it can be difficult for people if they think that it's trustworthy and someone's coming across all nicey nice to them, but then really there's another agenda behind it. And I see many autism organizations bring people in, and then as soon as that person starts getting a bit critical of the organization or taking on a neurodiversity perspective, they're kind of dropped by the organization and not seen again. It's kind of the on-message autistic advocate kind of issue. And I think this shows we really need to organise and build our own organisations, networks, efforts, and so on. And I think we're beginning to get there in the UK now, and having our own independent voice away from the big charities, which is a good thing.
Thank you. I'm keen to try and address some of the audience questions, so we'll try and get through a couple in the next few minutes. No, it's great. We've got a few. We won't get round to them all, but thank you for your questions. We do keep them, and they will inform further discussion, event activity. So responding to Maxfield, I can really relate to the tension of thinking radically, but working more pragmatically, strategically to create real change. Are there any words of advice for how to maintain positive self-image and motivation when you're working in this environment with criticism of your methods?
That is an excellent question, because that is an ongoing struggle. Speaking just for myself, my biggest defense against that is to remind myself that when people are attacking my ideas, they may even be attacking me as part of those ideas, but that none of it is really personal. It's not about me. It's about them feeling afraid and threatened. It's about them having ableist ideas that make them think my ideas sound like the inmates running the asylum. How can that be? How can autistic, like what Marjorie was saying, how can autistic people be safe supporting other autistic people because they don't believe in us, or it comes from their feelings of their own work being threatened. Like anytime anything is raised that makes somebody think, oh, I might be out of a job, which many of them might be, because many of them are doing a very bad job. they feel justifiably threatened because that's their mortgage and feeding their family. And so I remind myself that these attacks are against something bigger than me, that it's not personal. And I don't know if it would help anybody else, but it helps me to remember that I'm not getting attacked. I'm collateral damage in a much bigger war, and that keeps me going.
This is so wise, Maxfield, and I'm learning from this.
Thank you both. We're going to go to the last question now. Marjorie, is there cultural difference in the approach understanding of autism in the Canadian Francophone community, beyond the obvious language difference, and the Anglophone community? There appears to be quite a strong prejudice in France itself.
Yeah, it's not that bad in Quebec as it is in France. The main issue in Quebec is the language barrier that limits the possibility for people to connect with other autistics in the world. In English, it's easier because there is much more people. So in Quebec, the language barriers makes it possible for people to connect with other francophone, whether in Quebec or sometimes in France, where the reality is absolutely not the same and where the perception is much more negative. There is also an issue for in order to inform practitioners, because most of practitioners, language again is a barrier, because most practitioners do not necessarily get informed in all what's driven in the neurodiversity movement, mostly in English. So it doesn't infuse the practices from like social or health providers here in Quebec, among francophone providers. So that's an issue. And there's also something interesting about the wordings, about the word we use. In French, there's still some really big issues regarding like it's not moving along what we can see in English for the choice of wording, and there's some issues in the translation of some of those wordings, which are gaining kind of agreements in English, but the translation of it is sometimes awkward and is not so well, so people don't so well appropriate them. So that might be an issue because, I feel there is something. I feel it's important to be able to use some words, some identity first words, so we can gain some positive identity associated to autism. But that's an issue that we are facing here in Quebec.
Thank you.
I would like to quickly address that. You're going to see things getting better soon. I have been part of an initiative for several years in the Spanish-speaking community, helping them get quality materials translated into Spanish, and they've got a really great body of work now. And there are French language activists just getting started on that same project. So within the next few years, expect to see a big influx of translated work coming in.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
That is a fantastic note to finish on.
It's a beginning thing across. I've had some of my work translated into Hungarian and Swedish, Italian. It's getting those messages out there does take time, and especially with linguistic differences and some of those very issues you were talking about, Marjorie, I've come across before as well, but it's this effort's very much needed because some languages don't have a lot of this information being available, and people need that support and information. I guess we've come to the end of the event, and it's flown by rather quickly for me. It's been a really great experience, and I'd like to thank all our presenters today for a really brilliant conference. And just to remind people that we'll be back for more, with more events coming up this year. So keep a lookout on the PARC website and keep in touch. It's really good to build these international networks.
Definitely.
Collaborations into the future. So.
And we also have an evaluation form that we've been Neil's posted in the chat. So if people can give us a little bit of feedback, that would be very helpful. It actually helps us to make a case at the university for our very close relationship with PARC, because although the university doesn't fund PARC in any sort of way, these events help, you know, they really help. So we just like to keep that relationship very congenial. And I really want to thank Neil, of course, because when Neil coordinates an event like this, it's just amazing. And thank you to everybody. It's been brilliant.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I will be sending out, I'll send out the evaluation form in an email along with some of the links that Nikki shared earlier. I'll take the useful links out of the chat box. I'll send you the recording of the sessions that did opt in to be recorded. And I'll send you the closed captioning report, because I know some people would ask for that in terms of kind of like specific processing needs. If anyone does require would like specific slides, we're unable to coordinate that centrally, but if you do forward that request to the events inbox, I can forward it to the relevant speaker and ask them to liaise with you directly if they are happy to. That's all from me, and thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye everyone. Thank you.